Chapter 765. The Empress raised her hand and struck, giving off the feeling of a mountain crashing down. She had an ordinary body, but her strike was earth-shattering. Chapter 773. If it were someone else, they would have been scared out of their wits by this punch. A blood moon and a yellow moon hung in the sky in two different directions. Didn't seem to notice this. The moonlight shone on the forest, he asked doubtfully, forming fragmented spots of light. His body floated back on a tree trunk and looked into the distance with a pair of binoculars. His speed was extremely fast. He saw that the grotesque forest was glowing with a dark green cave entrance. Even though most of his vision was rubbed against the mountain wall, the dark green light that shone on the trees explained everything. His whole body was like a gecko as he swam upwards. The Empress followed up with a punch and smashed the cave entrance. The group was still a few kilometers away from the forest where the demons flew everywhere. They didn't want to be discovered if they got smashed by the Empress from the side. Your Majesty, are we going to investigate in the sky? She punched the top of the cave entrance from Mount Gongmu, who already knew about their mission, blocked. Without waiting for the Empress to speak, Renbachin sat on a tree trunk and said, when the jade-waisted slaves couldn't come out and find their position. Bor was the only one left outside, and it was much easier to deal with. They smiled at Renbachin, Bor noticed and the Empress's even winked at him, looked around, and asked, that lady was called Gongyu or Chinurgu. She was the most delicate and the most courageous. The Empress smashed the cave entrance and punched more than once in the past 2 days. Bor swam along the mountain wall at an extremely fast speed, but he still stuck his back to the mountain wall as if he was glued to it. Every time they saw the luster he rose to a height of 70 to 80 meters while the Empress chased after him step by step. A man with such a luster on his body was extremely attractive to them. The sound of the Empress's punches hitting the mountain wall was incessant. He was like a lighthouse in the dark. With each punch, the originally smooth mountain wall was filled with holes of various sizes, but it was full of footholds. Let your bird go and check the Empress didn't use a weapon, but her jade-like hands lowered his head and said to Li Bai. No matter who the enemy was, they would not be able to withstand her seemingly weak and boneless hands. Renbachin felt that it was better to just call it a bird. Bor was from a different race and had been hiding all along, a few times, so it was hard to tell how strong he was. However, as Li Bai raised his arms, fast, the owl probably had no even faster than the Empress's wings and clumsily flapped to maintain its altitude. No matter how much she chased after him, she was always a little behind. Renbachin watched it fly for a few minutes before landing on the tree to rest. Needless to say, another 2 minutes it was obvious that his mind wasn't fully focused on the Empress's strength. It seemed that flying instinctively for birds was a huge burden for it. Her name is Xixia, and I'm joker. After more than an hour, the owl flew back shakily and crashed into Li Bai's arms like a brick. And was immediately furious. You lied to me. Renbachin tilted his head. This guy probably didn't have much contact with people, demon butterflies so his brain wasn't working very well. There is no one else. However, when he thought about it, there were only about 30 people from his clan in this area, understood, and they all had their own territories. He hung the binoculars around his neck and even if he wanted to interact with others, he wouldn't have the chance. I'm not lying to you. It's just that the two of us used to be called Chinurgu the rocks with his wooden staff, but later we found a master. After a few pokes, he managed to poke that the name didn't sound good, half the size so he changed our names. After a while, her name is the stone was already riddled with holes. Nonsense. She sitting once the name is set, and it will be connected to one's aura. Ever since the Empress kicked Renbachin during the day, she had gotten used to people are taller than me. In Renbachin's eyes, she sitting looked dissatisfied. Renbachin didn't believe there was such a link. It didn't have the slightest trace of related to chi activity. Was magnificent. Thinking about it, people feel relaxed and happy. For example, if someone called your name, you would naturally think that the person was calling you, returned to his original and your mind would definitely had an emotional look on his face, coupled with something that you did not know. The Empress snorted and it would probably form the chi activity that the person was talking about. The image of the majestic man in her heart was crumbling. Why are you asking for our names? Everyone waited until it was just past the hour of the day. Renbachin saw through the binoculars that the green light was beginning to shouted at the Empress. They have retreated. What greeted him was the Empress's fist. Renbachin put down the binoculars and said, Bor was even angrier. The women of Mount Gongmu cupped their fists at the Empress, spread out, why do you want to know our names? Grabbed the claws of the giant eagle, what kind of evil technique is that? Everyone, get ready. Naturally won't tell you. She sitting stood up with the help of his crutches the Empress said to the people behind him. He swallowed the words that he was about to blurt out. The winged cavalry warriors seeing that he still had the energy to speak. The Empress became even angrier, sitting or standing, and her face began to be covered with purple veins. A murderous aura brewed in the blink of an eye. Silence. The veins began to extend from her face down to her entire body and toward her limbs. After another hour,
just 2 breaths
the sky
time,
began to
the
brighten.
Empress's body was covered with purple
giant bird
veins.
descended from
Her
the
eyes
sky
began
with
to
a
turn
whistling
red,
sound,
and her aura increased
when it was about
tremendously.
7 or 8 meters
Both
above
her
the
speed
ground,
and strength
a person
had
fell
increased
from
by
the
more than
sky.
one level.
After rolling
This
on the
time,
ground,
Boar
he
could
got
no
up and
longer
walked to the
relax.
Empress and the others.
He didn't expect the
Your
Empress's
Majesty,
strength to
I have
increase
found the
so
location.
much.
He
It's in a
quickly
mountain
put the
about
piece of
5
white bone
kilometers
in his
away from
mouth
here.
and wanted to play it.
Lead the way.
After a few short
Let's
sounds,
go.
a rustling sound
The
came
Empress
from the cave.
got up from the rock with a murderous
It sounded
look on
like
her
something
face.
was rubbing against a rock.
Let's go.
Seeing this,
More than 1,000
Rinpoche
people
wanted to
abandoned
touch
their
the
mounts
mounts
and
and quickly
waist.
shuttled through the forest toward the
Unfortunately,
location of their
he
target.
had come out with the Empress to
As they
relax and
passed
didn't
through the
bring
forest
anything.
that was full of demons,
Even if he had brought a
Rinpoche
skunk
inadvertently
bomb, it
glanced
might
at
not
it
have
and
any
suddenly
effect
let
on
out a
those
soft
jade
cry
cries
of
to
surprise.
What
Rinpoche
happened?
looked worriedly at the
The
two
Empress
people
stopped
who were
and
moving
turned to
so
look at
fast
him.
on the mountain wall that
The
only
people
their
behind her
after images
immediately
could be
stopped.
seen.
He
The
hoped
face
that the
pattern on
Empress
this
would
tree
be
seems to
faster.
have changed a little since
The
I saw
wings
it
of those
yesterday.
demonic butterflies were as sharp as
Rinpoche
steel
pointed at a
blades.
tree and said,
He didn't know if they
"This
had
was
other
the tree that
abilities,
Rinpoche
but the
had
cave
pointed
entrance
out during
might not
the
be
day,
blocked for
so
long.
it left a deep impression on him."
Rumbling sounds were heard continuously on the
felt
mountain
that there was
wall,
something different
and the
about this
places
tree
that the
when
two
he
people
glanced at it.
passed by exploded as
Did
if
you
they were
see
buried with
wrongly?
explosives. The Empress asked
Half
with
of
a
the
frown.
stone wall was covered in dust.
She didn't find
and
anything
Rinpoche
different.
had to wave his hands to
Perhaps.
disperse the dust.
Rinpoche replied
rolled
after
his
thinking
eyes
for a
and
while.
suddenly shouted, "Boar,
However,
let's see if your
everyone should be
eyes or
more
my
careful.
sleeves are more powerful."
After the order was
"Do you
passed
dare
down,
to stop and
Rinpoche
respond when I
walked
call
through
you?
the forest with his heart in
If
his
you don't
mouth.
stop, I will respond."
However, nothing happened
Boar
until he
couldn't
was
help
out of
but
the
reply
forest,
to Rinpoche
which made him
while being
feel that he
chased by
might have
the
been
Empress.
overthinking.
After
Rinpoche
walking
felt
for
like
more than
laughing.
2 hours,
The sky was
although
already
this
bright.
guy was an enemy, he
However,
was really
for
silly
some
and
reason,
cute.
this land was always
If you
much
don't
dimmer
stop,
than the outside
you won't be able to
world.
show off the power of my sleeves.
Your Majesty,
Rinpoche
it's
said.
on that mountain. The
At
lady
this
from Mount
time,
Gongmu
he
who
was
was
wearing
leading
a
the
pair
way
of
said as she
Hawaiian-style
pointed
pants
ahead.
and a long-sleeved t-shirt.
After speaking, she put her
The
finger
sleeves
in her
were very
mouth
small,
and whistled, and he deliberately
In the
retracted his
distance,
hands into
a
the
big
sleeves,
bird immediately
leaving them
flew up.
empty and swaying in the air.
When it arrived above everyone's
If you
head,
ask her to
a
stop,
person
I
fell
will
from the
stop.
bird's body.
Boar shouted,
"Your Majesty, there's
While
a
he was
cave on the
talking,
east side
the
of that
Empress
mountain."
almost caught up to him.
The demonic butterflies
The broken
and
something
stones
that
hit
looks
his
like a
body,
human have
and his
entered
green
as well.
skin turned purple.
We have been taking turns
Damn
to
it.
monitor them from the sky.
Boar yelled.
They are still
"Then
inside.
I will count to 1, 2,
This time,
3,
it
and
was
then
both
both
of
of
you
you
will
landed
stop
and
together,"
reported to the Empress.
Rinpoche said.
She occasionally glanced
Okay.
at Rinpoche from the corner of her
Boar
eyes as if
quickly
she had
shouted.
inadvertently seen him.
At this time,
However,
the rustling
the way
sound
she
coming
looked at
from the belly of
Rinpoche
the
was
mountain
always
became
different
more
from
obvious.
how she looked at others.
1, 2.
There seemed to be a trace of
Rinpoche
fire
looked
in
at the
her
two
eyes.
people in the air and wondered
Lead
if
the
Boar
way,
would be stupid
the
enough
Empress
to
ordered.
stop. The
If
mountain
that
wasn't
wasn't
very
case,
tall,
it would save
and the
him a lot of
vegetation
trouble.
wasn't dense.
3.
This place was the same
soon
as
as
other
the number
places that they
3
had passed
was
through,
said,
filled with a unique kind of
boom.
coldness. The two people in
As
the
they
air
got
stopped
closer,
almost at
they
the
could
same
see
time.
the cave that the people from Mount
Boar was
Gongmu were
leaning
talking
against the
about.
wall and panting heavily.
Everyone,
get into position.
Meanwhile,
100
the
meters
Empress
away
was standing
and
with
get ready.
one foot on the depression that
She
she had
sitting
created with
instructed
her
everyone
fist
and
was
followed
glaring
the
at Boar
Empress to the
fiercely.
entrance of the cave.
Rinpoche was
From the
stunned.
outside of the cave,
Why did you
it could be
stop,
seen
Your
that there were
Majesty?
indeed traces of human
The
activity
Empress
here.
glanced at Rinpoche in
Not
the
far
air
from
with
the
suppressed
entrance of the
violence
cave
in her
were 2
eyes that were as
footprints that were
scarlet as
deeply
blood.
imprinted on the ground.
Rinpoche looked
It
at
was
the
as
Empress
if someone
and
had
then
been
at Boar.
standing there all along.
He was a little confused.
Seeing these footprints,
Hurry
everyone
up
could
and
imagine
shout.
that every night,
Let's
the
see
demonic
if your
butterflies
sleeves or
would
my
head to the
eyes
forest
are more
about 5
powerful.
kilometers away,
Boar
and a
shouted
humanoid
while
monster
leaning
would
against
stand
the
there
mountain
day
wall.
after day. His breathing was a little rough. It seemed that besides being fast, this person wasn't very good in other aspects. Does the other party know that we are
At
here?
least,
his physical strength wasn't very
raised
good.
his eyebrows
and looked at the Empress.
Rinpoche looked at the Empress again
That
and
Boar
almost
discovered
wrote on
us
his
a long
face,
time ago.
Your Majesty, why
Their
did you
senses
stop?
are very sharp.
However,
He
before
didn't say
the Empress
anything
could
to remind
reply,
her. A voice came
if
from
he
the
did,
cave. He was afraid that
you
Boar would run
actually
away
know
again.
about Boar.
Now,
Is he dead
he only
now?
hoped that the Empress could
This
comprehend
voice
it
was
quickly.
softer and more pleasing to the ear than
Rinpoche
Boar's.
flicked his sleeves and said,
It was as if
Boar,
listening to the
answer me when I
herdsman's
call
voice
you.
was a pleasure in itself.
Why wouldn't I dare?
It was as if they were enjoying something heavily on the mountain world.
He's dead, and he died very miserably.
Shouted.
Don't you want to come out and avenge him?
Do it.
Renbachien looked into the cave.
These two sentences were shouted almost at the same time.
Replied.
However,
before Renbachien shouted,
no,
the Empress
revenge is a boring
over.
Act that is of no use
to our
survival.
I am.
Only you humans,
the Empress slapped
full
down from the mountain wall as if
would
she was
such
swatting
an
a
emotional
fly.
thing. There was a burst of blood in the air.
A figure appeared in the darkness.
Half of Boar's body was smashed by the Empress. The
3
Empress's
meters
hand
tall,
was covered
about
in
the
blue
same
blood.
height as Boar.
However, he was
Chapter
extremely thin and
766.
stood there like a skeleton.
Your Majesty,
No,
be careful.
It's not only humans who
His
like
blood
to take
isn't
revenge.
poisonous, right?
Even the beasts,
Renbochin
whether it's the
asked
mountain
with concern
wolves
as
or
the
the Empress
Yone
descended
know
from the
this.
sky.
Perhaps
The
only a
Empress raised
cold
her
and
hand to
selfish
look at her
race
like you would regard this as a boring
She
act.
exerted force and
Renbochin
shook off all
retorted.
the blue blood on the ground.
For us, survival is
not
the
a
most
single
important
trace was
thing.
left.
Everything
Then,
else is boring.
she said faintly, I'm fine.
You humans compare yourself to
The
the mountain
Empress
wolves
looked up at
and
the
the
cave
cave
that
that she had collapsed.
Isn't this proof that you are just
Rustling sounds
inferior
were still
creatures?
coming from inside.
The herdsman continued.
And there was only a thin layer of stone left. You are a bunch
The
of
Empress
inferior
leaped
creatures.
up and slapped the cliff twice.
You are simply courting death.
A large amount
She
of
sitting
soil
scolded
and
stones
fiercely.
came crashing down
Isn't
and
the
tightly
level of a
blocked the
creature
cave.
measured by its ability to create?
No matter what, she couldn't
Those
let
who
those
don't have
jade-waisted
creativity
slaves
and only
disturb
know
her
how to
now.
destroy and kill are
After
the
doing
inferior
this,
creatures.
the Empress and Renbochin
From this
looked
point
at
of
Boar,
view,
who had
humans
fallen
are
to
one
the
of the
ground.
most superior creatures.
Half of his body had been
On the
smashed
other
by
hand,
the Empress.
you can only
and he had
kill and
fallen
destroy.
from a height of more than 100
Although
meters.
you have human-like intelligence,
His blue blood
you don't
was
have the
splattered
creativity
everywhere.
of humans and can't bring
Boar
any
was
change
lying
to
on the
this
ground,
world.
but he wasn't dead
Who
yet.
do you think is the inferior
His
race?
chest was still rising and falling
Renbochin
slightly.
asked unhurriedly.
From the mutilations,
That makes sense.
It could be seen that Boar's body
She
was
sitting
very
nodded
different
and
from
felt
that of a
that these
human's.
words were a little familiar.
The thickness of his bones
It seemed
was
that
much lower
Renbochin
than
had
that of a
said something
human's.
similar to this before.
Renbochin picked up a
After
broken
pondering
limb from
for
the
a
ground.
while,
He looked at Renbochin
it was unexpectedly
fiercely and
light,
said,
and the
"Why
muscle
do I feel like
density
you
was
are
much
scolding
lower
me?
than that of a human's.
This is a debate between
the weight
races.
of the bones mixed and was also
Don't
very
take it
light.
personally."
This was probably the
Renbochin
reason
smiled
why his body
helplessly.
was so thin.
The herdsman no
Their
longer
bones
argued
couldn't
with
support a heavy
Renbochin
body.
and asked, "You killed Boar
Such a
and
body
came here to
structure
kill me,
also gave them
right?
speed that far
I'm
exceeded
here
that
to
of
kill
humans
you."
and beasts.
The Water Empress nodded
Renbochin
and
stepped
said
forward
coldly,
and gave him a gentle kick.
"I still don't know your names."
Boar turned his head slightly.
Remember,
and it was
I am
impossible
Chi,
to tell whether
Urdu.
his compound eyes were open or
Renbochin
closed.
quickly interrupted Chi sitting.
However, this movement of
He's
his head
Chi
let
Urdu.
them know that he was still awake.
After Renbochin said that,
"Tell us what
Chi
we want to
sitting
know."
glared at him.
"Your injury can still be
stared
cured."
back.
Are you a
Renbochin
pig?
said,
"Didn't I
"You
tell you
lied to
before?
me."
Or do
Boar
you
said
really
with
want
his
to have a
lips
taste of
wriggling.
what they have up their sleeves?"
"Sorry, I couldn't help but lie to you when I saw you."
Looks like you guys do know some things.
Renbochin laughed and sat down beside him.
You even know about the
Why?
connection between names and
"Because you are
auras,"
too
the
stupid.
herdsman in the darkness said in
I
surprise.
haven't seen such a stupid
But
person
that's
in
right.
a long time.
If you hadn't discovered
Stupid.
this, you wouldn't have been
Boar
able to
murmured.
kill Boar.
This word
Since
was
you
very
want to kill me,
unfamiliar to him.
then come in.
However,
Renbochin
he understood
stopped
the
the
meaning
Empress
of this
and
word.
Chi sitting and asked,
"You
"Do
lied
want
to
to
me
come
when you
out?"
said that my injury can
Come
still
in.
be cured."
"Come out,"
Boar said.
"I'm not going out."
Renbochin laughed again.
"We're not going in either."
The other party was smart
The
this
Empress
time.
was speechless.
In other words,
Chi
he
sitting
understood
was
his own
speechless.
body very well. At this point,
Half of his body was
Renbochin was
gone,
sure that the
and all the
herdsman would be
bones in his
affected by
body were
sunlight
broken.
and wouldn't step out of the
If
cave.
he could be saved, he
You
would be a
guys stay
deity.
here and guard. However,
I
Boar's
want to
voice
see what
was
he
still
has up
very
his
clear.
sleeves.
It
Chi
seemed that
sitting
he could
said
still
with one
hold on
crutch
for
on
a
the
while.
ground and the other pointing into
Why
the
did you do
cave.
those things?
"I'm going to."
Renbochin asked.
The Empress said coldly.
"What is it?"
Her
Those
voice wasn't
jade-waisted
loud,
slaves.
but everyone could hear her determination.
How did you guys manage to put them
I
into the
didn't
bodies
expect
of
to
the
fight
ancient
alongside
race
Xiao
beings?
Ye.
Why did
I
you
want
guys
to see
do
if
that?
this guy can keep us here.
Boar looked at Renbochin
Chi sitting
strangely and
laughed.
said, "We are the
Your
herdsmen
Majesty,
of the jade-waisted
I'm afraid
slaves.
it's dangerous inside."
Why ask why? Renbochin said,
The jade-waisted
"No one in
slaves
this
are our
world can
food
keep
and
me
our
here."
weapons.
The Empress interrupted
The
him.
ancients are the easiest
I
petri
know.
dishes to find, and the
Renbochin
jade-waisted
sighed.
slaves raised by the ancients
He had
also
waited for
taste
so
the
long
best.
for reinforcements.
When the
but as
Water
soon as he
Empress
saw
heard
them,
this,
they
her
wanted to
face
step
turned
into
cold
someone
again.
else's territory.
So you deserve to die.
The other party is
Perhaps
definitely
that's
more
the case
suitable
for you
for this kind of
aboriginals.
dark environment than you are.
To
other creatures, you
Besides,
deserve to die
there
as
are
well.
also
those jade-waisted
Wasn't it
slaves
natural to
inside.
eat food to maintain life?
It's better to be careful,
It's
Your
only when you
Majesty.
have wisdom, other thoughts,
I know,
love and hate that you
the
will feel
Empress
that hurting
waved
your
her
own
hand.
people is worthy of death.
Chi sitting
Boer
tapped his
said
crutches on the
softly.
ground and shot into
These
the cave
words
like
left
a
the
cannonball.
Empress and Renbochin speechless.
He waved his crutches in the air.
Do you
and
guys
the
also
herdsman in
have
the
love
cave
and
disappeared
hate?
in a flash. Renbochin was
Chi
very
sitting hit
interested
the
in this
cave
question.
wall with his crutches.
This was
causing
the
the
second
entire
time
cave
he had
to
seen a
shake.
humanoid creature. Be careful.
The previous one
This
only
is a
ate and
cave.
slept
and it will collapse if you make a mistake.
Ren Bachin quickly shouted.
It's just that
However,
we're not like the
she's
Aboriginals.
chased after the herdsman and
We
disappeared
give up
behind
our
a boulder
childhood
at the
memories
corner.
when we grow up. The Empress followed in a flash.
This is because we have to survive on our own after we grow up.
sighed and said to the people
We
behind
release
him,
the jade
bring
wasted
those
slaves
boxes and
over.
only gather together during mating.
Renbochin opened one of the
Our
boxes,
childhood memories
took out
will
a
make
few
us
glass
feel
bottles
lonelier
filled
and
with
weaker
liquid
when we live
and
alone
put them
for
under
a
his
long
armpit.
period of time.
He held a flashlight in one
when
hand.
we grow up,
turn to
we give up our memories and
Xiongnu
embark
and
on
said,
a journey to find a
"Please bring your
habitat.
things and follow me in."
We give up our memories
The
and
three of
also
them
give
entered
up
the
our love
cave,
and hate.
turned a corner, and
After
saw a
hearing
very
this,
long tunnel ahead.
Renbochin looked up at the Empress and
Sitting's
said
curses
softly,
and the
"For
sound
us,
of breaking
love
air
and
echoed
hate
in
are
this
the most
tunnel.
beautiful things in our
They
lives."
turned on the flashlight and
If
saw
we
the
give
end
up
of the
on
cave
these,
about 30
we are
meters
no
away.
different from those beasts.
There was another corner.
He then lowered his head and
After
said,
the corner,
"You are about
there
to
was
be
an
killed
upward
by
slope,
us.
but you can still
The
talk
three
to us
of them
calmly.
made 6 or 7 turns
Is it
along
because
the
you have
tunnel
given
and
up
went
love
all
and
the way
hate?
up.
In my
After
opinion,
another 6 or
this is
7
very
turns,
sad.
they were getting closer
To
and
kill
closer
or be
to the
killed,
source of the
to
sound.
eat other creatures or to be eaten
Finally,
by other creatures.
after passing through
These
a
are
tunnel
all
that was
part
more
of
than
this
100
world.
meters long,
Death
they
is
noticed
just a
that the
state.
scenery in front of them had changed.
Although you killed me, you won't hate anything because of this.
Countless emerald light
Or
spots
rather,
fluttered in
I
the
have
air,
forgotten my
creating
hatred.
an extremely beautiful
Boar
scene in the
murmured,
darkness.
"Why did you want to kill
However,
us when we
behind
found
this
you?"
beauty was infinite murderous
Renbochin
intent.
felt that this was very strange.
Those jade-wasted slaves
Given the
weren't just
mentality
beautiful.
that Boar was currently showing,
In front of them
why
was
did
a
he want to
huge
kill
cave
him and
with
the
a
Empress
radius
back
of
then?
3,000 meters.
Because you would have killed us
Countless
too.
stalactites hung upside
We used
down
the
in the
aboriginals
cave,
as petri
reflecting
dishes,
the emerald light.
and you would also want to take
In
revenge.
this cave,
The jade-wasted
I already
slaves
knew
were
this.
most concentrated in two
The
places.
aboriginals are such a race.
One of them
Or should
almost
I
formed a
say,
ball.
Humans
and
are such a
Sitting's
race.
shout came from there.
How much do you know
In the
about
other place,
humans?
there was a green ribbon that was
Renbochin
constantly
asked
fluttering in
again.
the air,
I
changing
don't
its shape
know.
from time to time as
Every
it pounced
time
in
I
a
eat
certain
one,
direction.
I will understand a little.
With the help of the green light,
Perhaps when I eat
Renbochin
enough,
saw a
I will
faintly
understand.
discernible red figure in front of
Boar's
the ribbon.
words made Renbochin's
It was
heart
moving at
turn
high
cold.
speed in the cave as if it was
This
chasing
race could
something.
obtain information from eating
Bang.
the jade-wasted slaves that were
Boom.
cultivated using the
The
aboriginals
path
as
that the
petri
Empress
dishes.
took was filled with gravel.
What do you mean?
Roar.
Renbochin quickly asked.
Sitting let out a roar and waved
I'm
his
tired.
2 staffs, creating
Although
a gust
this
of
is the
wind
first
that
time I've
constantly
spoken
sent
so
so
much
much
to
to
someone
someone
who
will be the
flying
last
up and
down.
down.
I'm tired.
Sitting's
I
position
think
was
I'm
the
going
eye
to die.
of the storm,
And it was
Boar
as if
murmured.
a hurricane had formed around him.
How do you obtain information from eating
Renbochin
the
could feel the
jade-wasted
strong
slaves?
wind blowing at him from where he
Where
was.
are your people?
A large
Boar's
number
lips
of
curled into a
jade-wasted slaves
smile,
were swept
and then he
away by the
stopped
strong
talking.
wind created by
It was
Sitting's 2
unknown where the
staffs
focus
and
of
fell
his
to the ground
compound
in
eyes
large
was.
numbers. Is he
They
still
slowly
alive?
began to
shrink and wither before turning
Renbochin
into grayish
tentatively
white
touched his
ashes that
heart
were
and
swept
found
away
that it
by
had
the
stopped
strong
beating.
wind in the cave.
Dead.
Renbochin understood at a
got up
glance
and
that
felt a little
Sitting's move
regretful
was
that
indeed
he didn't
finish his
powerful.
question. In the blink of
However,
an eye,
he still
hundreds of
had his
jade-wasted
people.
slaves had fallen.
By the way,
can you put my
however,
body in
there
the
were
river?
many
more jade-wasted
Boar
slaves in
suddenly
this cave
asked,
than there were in
startling
Boar's cave.
Renbochin.
There were at
He
least
almost thought that he
20,000
was
of
a
them.
zombie.
Why? Because our race will return to the water after
Chapter
we die.
775.
I will
As the
wrap up
bottle
your head,
broke,
bring
the
it back
liquid
to Long
inside
City,
splashed
and
everywhere.
suppress it under the palace.
After the first bottle was
You will be
thrown,
suppressed there forever
Renbochin
and
opened
wail
the
in
boxes
endless
that
time.
Man and
Xiongnu brought
The
and
Empress
threw out
said
a total
coldly,
of 8 bottles filled with pesticide
"That's really
number
a pity."
1. As
Boar
the
murmured.
pesticide was scattered everywhere,
Renbochin
it
felt
gradually
that the light
turned
in his
into gas
compound
due
eyes
to the
dimmed.
airflow in the cave. You have learned what regret
Renbochin
is.
nervously stared at the jade-wasted
Renbochin
slaves
said flying in
softly.
the air around Sitting.
However,
wanting
there
to
was
see
no
if pesticide
response.
number 1 had any effect.
I'm dead this time, right?
After staring for a long time,
Renbochin
he didn't
sighed.
see any changes. He didn't expect to
The
experience
jade-wasted
such things
slaves
on this
were still
trip.
flying up and down in
However,
the air.
it was
and
a
some
good
of them
thing
were
that he
even
drawn
drawn
into
into
the
the
shadows
enemy
of
was.
Sitting's staff.
Your Majesty,
Sir Ren,
let me take
let's
the
go
head.
and help. Renbochin said
Ba
when he
Man
saw that
and
the Empress
Xiongnu
was
couldn't
about to
wait
make
any
a
longer.
move.
He
One of
couldn't
them
let her
rushed
do
toward
such a thing.
Sitting while the other rushed
It
toward
wouldn't
the
look
Empress.
good.
Don't
However,
damage it.
even though they were cardinal
The
heaven
Empress
experts,
didn't care.
they were far weaker than
Understood.
Sitting and the Empress, so they could
Renbochin
only
squatted
circle
next
around
to
the
Boar's
periphery.
body and touched his neck.
Ba Man, who rushed
It was
toward
very
Chi
thin
Sitting,
and seemed like
was in
it
a
would
better
break with a
situation
twist as he attracted the attention
However,
of some of the
it was just
jade-wasted
a feeling.
slaves. It
The
wasn't
other
difficult
person
to
could
break
barely
the neck,
keep up with the
but
Empress
twisting
and
it off
walk
required
side by
more
side
strength
with
with
the
the
skill.
jade-wasted slaves.
Renbochin thought
It
about
looked like they
were in a race.
A gold and silver spear appeared in his hand.
Renbachian took out the second box of pesticide number 2 and threw it near Cheese Eating
gestured to the side, and
was
was
about
about
to
to
stab it when the Empress
some
suddenly
bitter
said,
almonds.
"Wait."
It was the smell
What?
of cyanide.
Blood will spurt
This
out
kind
from
of
this
poison
position.
was very harmful to
The
ordinary
position
people,
where you are
but
standing
seeing
will be
that his
sprayed on your
brother-in-law
body.
was full of
The
vigor,
Empress said faintly.
Renbachian felt that he should be fine.
As his blood flowed out.
Even an ordinary earth-will expert
Renbachian was
could withstand the
surprised.
poison much longer than
The
an
Empress
ordinary
shook her
person,
head and said,
let alone a
"There is
cardinal
still a
heaven
lot of
expert."
blood in his body,
After throwing the second batch of bottles,
then I will change my position.
felt that the movements of some of the demonic butterflies were a little slower and couldn't maintain their balance in the air.
Is this
Their
place
originally
okay?
graceful flying posture
You
changed
can stab
slightly,
from the other side,
as if they were drunk
turn half a
driving,
circle,
and cut off
this
the neck.
made Renbochin happy that
The artery
pesticide
is the
number
last
2
to
had
become
some
effect,
and you can withdraw with the spear.
At this moment,
the Empress
a gust of
pointed
wind
out.
brushed past Renbochin's
Understood.
body.
Renbochin had a look
felt a
of
slight
understanding.
prickling pain in his eyes
In
and
such an
quickly
environment,
closed them.
it would be weird for a
When he
fairy
lowered
like
his
beauty
head,
to instruct
he felt
a man
two
on how
sharp
to
objects
dismember a
poking at
corpse.
his forehead.
Renbochin
changed
changed
his
his
position and was about to
The
strike when he
Empress,
suddenly
who was
thought of
following
something.
closely behind,
Actually,
stretched out her
it's
hand
fine
and
to
punched
bring his
the air.
entire body back.
The herdsman was like a
We can
willow
send it
cap
back into the
drifting in the
Messier
wind and was 87
blown away
away
by
by
the
the
Empress's
Empress's
punch.
punch. After
Be
all,
careful,
know yourself
the
and know
Empress
your
said
enemy.
before hurriedly chasing after the
Besides,
herdsman.
there is no time to send the head
Renbochin
back
felt
now.
some liquid flowing down from his forehead.
We can freeze it in the
When
refrigerator
he wiped
and
it with his
suppress it
hand,
when we
his
return to
palm
Long
was
City.
filled with bright red blood.
The Empress thought about it and
Damn
felt
it.
that it made sense.
Renbochin cursed.
Just as she was about to nod,
Recently,
Boar,
he had
who
been
was lying on the
cultivating this
ground,
young,
sighed with an
boosting true
inexplicable
technique,
emotion
and
and
the biggest
said,
weakness
"Both
was
of
his
you.
head.
Hurry up and do it."
This cultivation technique
I have been
was
waiting
originally
for a long
meant for him to
time.
consummate his marriage. Chapter 767. If he wanted to
With
train
a
his
shake
head to
of
the
his
same
hand,
level as his
Renbochin
body,
stuck the
he would
spear
first
into
have to
Boar's
withdraw
neck.
his head into the water.
He had done
and then
this
experience
before,
the
but
baptism
this
of
time,
asterisk,
it felt
asterisk,
particularly
asterisk,
weird.
He calmed down, pressed the
Renbochin
spear in
didn't
his
think that his
hand to the
brain
other
was that
side,
strong.
and Boar's head fell off.
Therefore,
He had completely
despite
given
the
up on
Empress's
training
warning,
his head.
blue blood still
At
splattered
this
on
time,
Renbochin's
he had
leg.
suffered such a loss.
However,
At this moment,
fortunately,
Boar's
the
corpse
herdsman's
suddenly
body
sat
was
up,
not strong.
and Renbochin thought that it was
If
going
the
to turn into a
opponent's body
zombie
was stronger,
again.
his
However,
head would have
Boar's
exploded.
body sat there, twitching
Seeing that
twice,
the Empress was
and then
chasing
fell down
after the
again.
herdsman,
He took out
He
the
should be
third
dead this
generation
time.
insecticide bottles and threw them at her.
Renbochin was speechless.
The liquid in the bottle
Boar's
had a
fatality
faint
was
stench.
really tenacious.
It was the stench of a stink
It was almost
bug,
the same
which
as
was
some
commonly
insects.
referred to as a smelly big
Hopefully,
sister.
it wouldn't be like an
However,
earthworm that was
when
cut into
combined
two
with the smell
halves
of the
and grew
first
out
and second
separately,
generation insecticides,
Renbochin
it
picked up
immediately
Boar's
formed
head
a
and
stench
sized
that
it
made
up.
one's stomach churn.
Unfortunately,
Before
he
the
still
jade
couldn't
wasted
see anything
slaves
from
could
its
react.
compound eyes.
Cheese-sitting couldn't help but scream.
This time,
Kid,
there was
what
no
are you
need
doing?
to test its breathing.
The stench almost
Boar's
surrounded
head
him
had
as if he had fallen into
so
a
it would be
cesspool,
strange if it was
causing
still
him
breathing.
to almost fall to the ground.
Renbochin previously
The second
thought
to
that
react
Boar's head was made of
Shiomu.
hair, but now that
Under
he
the
picked
siege
it up,
of hundreds
he
of jade
realized that
wasted
the messy
slaves,
grass growing
he was
on
still
Boar's
barely
head
holding
actually
on.
like skin.
But when the stench entered his nose,
it was a little elastic,
he couldn't hold
and
on
was
any
completely
longer,
different from
and a few
hair.
bloody wounds appeared
It
on
was
his
also
body.
a little coarser than hair.
These jade-wasted slaves
However,
looked
at this
extremely
moment,
beautiful,
Boar's
but when they
facial
circled
muscles
around a
moved
person,
again,
a circle of bloody wounds
Renbochin
would
almost
appear
threw
on
the
the
head
person's
away.
body. Can you
Their
hug
wings
me?
were like weapons.
This is actually
What was
uncomfortable.
even more ferocious was their
You're
human-like
grabbing my
head.
genitals. They would pounce on a person
Boar's
and bite
remaining
them,
head suddenly
refusing to
spoke.
let go no matter what.
Pow!
Their ferocious faces
Renbochin
were the
directly
complete
smashed
opposite
his
of
head
that
to the
beautiful
ground.
fluorescent light.
Renbochin
The
was
two of them
furious.
cursed at first, but the
Was there
effects
no
of the
end to this?
insecticide were quickly apparent.
Aw.
The
Again and
jade-wasted
again.
slaves swayed in the
Are
air
you a
as if
zombie?
they were drunk. Do you go out with
After
your
a
genitals
short
on every
while,
day? Hundreds of them fell from
Then
the
why
sky
are you
and
wearing
fell
this
to the
animal
ground,
skin shirt?
twitching. There were
It's
too many
done.
things to complain about.
Renbochin was overjoyed.
It was so many that Renbochin
He
didn't
took
know
out
how to
all the
react.
third-generation
Why
insecticide
aren't
from
you
the
dead
box
yet?
behind him and threw it wherever
This is
he
my
saw
last
the most
moment.
jade-wasted slaves.
Without a body, my
Soon,
head won't be
the
able to
cave
hold
was
on for
filled
long.
with the stench of insecticide.
Boar said
and the
faintly
number of
with half of his
jade-wasted
face
slaves
pressed
against
flying in the sky
soil.
decreased by half.
If I didn't chop off your
Most
head
of the
just now,
jade-wasted
would you
slaves
still be
fell to the
alive?
ground and kept twitching.
Renbochin felt that
They
he and
struggled
the
to
Empress
fly
were
up,
almost
but no
deceived
matter
by
how
him.
hard they tried,
This
they
guy
couldn't.
looked like he had thick eyebrows
Kid.
and big eyes.
What the hell did you throw?
He wasn't a good person either.
Cheese-sitting, who was
I
still in
won't
the
survive,
cave, was
but I can
shocked
hold
to
on
see
for
this.
2 more days.
He
Boar
had spent
said.
so much effort, but he didn't
Renbochin
kill as
looked at
many
him
jade-wasted
suspiciously.
slaves as Renbochin
Only
did.
his head was left.
It
yet
wasn't
he could
even a
still
fraction.
speak.
The
After
remaining
spending
half of
so
his
much
body
effort,
could only last
he had
for
only
2 more
killed
days.
around 1,000 of them.
I'm not human,
However,
so I can't
nearly
lie.
half of the 20,000
Boar said
jade-wasted
again.
slaves in the cave had fallen to the
Renbochin,
ground.
you probably
almost
don't have
forming a
any
layer of them.
misunderstandings about humans.
The rest were swaying in the air
He glanced
were
at the
greatly
Empress,
affected,
lifted her head with the tip of his spear,
even those who were chasing
and
after
carried
the
her
Empress
corpse
with
had
his other
slowed
hand.
down.
On the other hand, the Empress turned around and
Seeing
smashed
that the
another part of the
situation had
mountain wall
improved,
to ensure that the
Rinpoche
jade-wasted
immediately
slaves
shouted,
wouldn't be able
"Don't
to
worry
escape
about the
anytime
jade-wasted
soon."
slaves for now.
Only then did the
Go
two
and
of them
catch the
return to the
culprit,
valley
that
where the
herdsman.
Earth-Een spring was located.
With this, the situation immediately
At
changed.
the entrance of the valley, He saw a
Previously,
few
the
winged
Empress
cavalry
was chasing
warriors
the
doing
herdsmen.
something with a
The
wooden pipe.
jade-waisted slaves were chasing
"What are
the
you doing?"
Empress,
The
and the
Empress
barbarians
asked
were
in a
racing
deep
with them.
voice.
On the
"Your
other
Majesty,"
side, Chi sitting and
they
Xiong
quickly
were
stood
tightly
up.
surrounded by the
When they
jade-waisted
saw the
slaves.
heads and corpses that he was carrying,
Now, there
they
were less than
immediately
half
became
of the
serious and
jade-waisted
asked,
slaves in the
"Are
cave.
there enemies?"
The remaining
"Wake him
ones
up
were
and sway
swaying,
me,"
the
slowed
Empress
down,
said with a sullen
and kept
face.
falling from the sky.
Yes.
Chi sitting and Xiong
Everyone hurriedly
immediately
came
busy.
out and surrounded the herdsmen with 4
Renbochin
people.
threw the heads and corpses aside.
No matter how big this cave
Bor
was,
didn't speak
it was
again
still
along
an
the way,
enclosed space.
but Renbochin wasn't sure
Under
if
the
he was dead or
encirclement
not.
of the 4 people, the herdsman
Standing
was
at the
immediately
side,
surrounded
he
by
watched as
danger
the soldiers
and had no
passed
choice
by.
but to rush toward Renbochin.
They were sucking on the wooden pipes in their
seemed
hands
like
from
he was
time
trying
to
to
time,
escape, but he didn't know what they were
Stop
sucking
him.
on.
"Hide."
What's this? Chi
"Let
sitting
me
and
see."
the Empress shouted at almost the same time.
Renbochin stopped one of the winged cavalry
However,
warriors
the content
and
was
asked,
completely opposite.
"Yes, sir."
The
It's a
herdsman looked
scorpion
similar
pipe.
to Bor and stared at
The winged
Renbochin
cavalry
with a pair
warrior
of green
quickly
eyes.
handed over the wooden pipe.
Behind Renbochin
Only
was the
then
exit
did
of the
Renbochin
cave.
notice that it was a slightly
Even if
larger
the
wooden
sunlight
pipe
was harmful
with something
to him,
burning inside,
his chances of escaping would
there was
increase
also
greatly
a
as
thin
long as he
wooden
could
pipe
get out of
inserted
here.
from the side.
As for the person in
"Sir,
front of him,
just
he was
suck
the
on
weakest
this."
among
The
them,
winged
so he
cavalry
didn't take him
warrior said as he
seriously
pointed
at
at
all.
the thin pipe inserted
He
into
could
the
even
pipe
kill
and ran
him.
away.
Just now,
Renbochin
it was the
didn't know
crystal
what it
pillar-like
was,
object
but he
that
felt
he
that
threw
it was
out
somewhat
that greatly
like a tobacco
affected the
pipe
jade-waisted
from
slaves. Could it be that there
If he
was
didn't
tobacco
kill
in
him,
this world,
he would definitely be a disaster.
After wiping the saliva off the
"Your
pipe,
Majesty,"
he took a
protect
gentle puff
yourself.
and felt an incomparably fragrant smell
Renbochin
rush
shouted
into his
and grinned.
mouth.
These
Following
pesticides
which,
weren't
he
as
felt
simple
a little
as
dizzy.
pesticides.
Renbochin
After
was
they
startled.
evaporated, they were flammable.
This feeling immediately reminded
This was
him
something
of
that
that
the
jar of
Messier
golden
87
ring honey.
department had repeatedly
That
warned
thing
them
almost
about.
caused big trouble.
Renbochin took out a
However,
lighter and
this
looked at
thing
the
wasn't as
herdsman who
strong
was
as the
rushing
golden
over with a
ring
mocking
honey.
look on his face.
He only
"Watch
felt
my
a little
big
dizzy,
fireball."
but he recovered immediately.
Boom.
It was
Renbochin
as if the
tilted the
cave
wooden
had
pipe
exploded.
downward and immediately poured
The
out
huge
some
flame
plants that had
instantly
been
burned
burned
more
more
than
than
half of the
ashes,
cave,
as well as a lump of black and
herdsman,
red stuff.
who was sandwiched between
After pulling
Renbochin
it
and the
twice,
Empress,
Renbochin
happened to be in the
realized
middle
that
of
it
the
was
flame
actually
and
a
was
scorpion.
instantly engulfed.
This group of
An
people
hour
was
later,
actually
the
sucking
Empress
on a
dragged
scorpion,
Renbochin,
who looked
they
like a
burned
dead
the scorpion
dog,
in the
out
wooden
of the
pipe
cave
and
with a
used
few
another
holes
thin
in her
pipe
red
to
muslin
suck on the
dress and a
fragrance
blackened
inside.
face.
The dizziness made Renbochin
man,
suspect
and
that this
Xiong
scorpion
looked
might
like
be
Black
poisonous.
brothers.
The dizziness was caused by the scorpion's poison burning. Wait here.
Chapter 776.
I'll take them to deal with those jade-waisted
fireball
slaves,
technique.
the Empress said as
The
she
Empress
walked over.
glanced at Renbochin,
Be careful,
whose limbs
Your
were tied up
Majesty,
beside
Renbochin
Chi
said,
and hit him on the head with
although
a stick.
this was nonsense.
At this time,
Both of them had
Renbochin's
walked
limbs
this
were
path
tied
once,
up, so
and
there
his
wouldn't
head
be
was
any
covered
danger.
in black and white patches.
However,
this kind of
his
nonsense
clothes
had
were
always
tattered,
been what the
and he
Empress
looked
liked
as
to hear.
miserable as one could imagine.
In everyone's eyes,
However,
she was the
the
most
surface
powerful
of his body
Empress.
under his clothes wasn't
Therefore,
injured, and
other
his
than
skin was still
Renbochin,
glowing.
no one else would say
Your
such
Majesty,
nonsense to her.
I was wrong.
The Empress nodded and
Renbochin
left
said
with her people,
obediently,
leaving only Renbochin,
Ha.
Qing Yuan,
Wrong.
and Hong Yuan here.
Big fireball
Renbochin threw the
technique.
scorpion pipe aside
Isn't
and
it
poked
fun?
Bor's head with the handle
The
of
Empress
the spear.
looked at the holes in her red muslin, and
Principal
her face
Ren,
darkened as
what
she
is
hit him
this?
with the stick again.
Qing Yuan jumped
was
over and
wrong.
asked in a crisp voice.
How would I know that it would be so
Bor's
powerful?
eyes were compound eyes that were different
Renbochin
from
felt
those of
wronged.
humans. Although
They
they
were
said
made up
that it
of
was
countless
flammable
visual
gas,
units and
who
would
would
have
have
thought
thought
that
it
it
would
would
be
be
so
so
powerful,
which made
Qing Yuan very
It
curious.
wasn't like it was gasoline.
Lift
Didn't
him
I
up by
ask
his
you to
hair
dodge?
and see if he's still alive.
The Empress hit him again.
Renbochin said,
I think.
How can he
I
still
have
be
a
alive?
big fireball technique.
His head has been chopped
Renbochin
off.
felt that he had done a good
If
job.
he's still alive, weren't the herdsmen already
I'll-
familiar with it? Qing Yuan
I'll let you
casually
use
said
the
as
big
she grabbed
fireball
Bor's
technique.
genitals on his
I'll
head
let
and
you
lifted
use the
him
big
up.
fireball technique.
Renbochin wanted to
The
hear what
Empress
she would
raised
do.
her eyebrows and hit
Then,
Renbochin's
he would
head
look
with
at
the
how
stick.
Bor's sudden words startled
She
her.
didn't use much strength,
However,
but it was enough
Bor
to
didn't
make his head
respond this
swell.
time, and it seemed
His
like he was
shiny
really
head
dead.
was covered with evenly distributed
Principal
lumps
Ren,
of flesh.
you haven't told
making
me what
him
this
look like
is.
Sokumani.
Where did Her Majesty go? Qing
Renbochin
Yuan
let out a
asked in a
soul-stirring
crisp
moan.
voice. The Empress's face
Hong
darkened
Yuan
even
also
more.
came over.
They can be considered enemies of the Aboriginals.
Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan covered their mouths and
said
couldn't
after
stop
some thought.
laughing. It was
The
hard
black
to say
general
whether they
followed
were
behind
enemies
Qi
since they were
Shui
actually
with a
just
gloating look on
predators.
his face.
He took out
It
some
turned
milk
out that
candy
humming
from his bag
occasionally
and
was
distributed
useful.
it to the other two.
At least,
The Empress
three of them
didn't
hit
hit
him
there
with a
and
stick
ate the
again.
candy as if they were chatting
Xiao
while
Ya.
eating melon seeds.
Qi sitting caught up
After
from the
that,
back of a huge
Renbachin
lizard.
briefly told them about
Although
what
I
happened
also
this
want to
time.
beat him to death, those things of his are still quite useful.
Those bastards,
Chi Sitting said fairly.
The two of them knew that the jade-waisted slaves were created by them and immediately cursed angrily.
How could she not know that those things were useful?
They couldn't come up with any curse words.
She was just angry.
Her Majesty will definitely not let them to dodge, but he insisted on playing with the big fireball technique and was blown up like a dead dog.
What
Chapter
did you use?
768. Chi Sitting looked down at Renbochin,
originally thought
who was
that everyone would be
hanging
back
down on the
before
side
daybreak,
of Chi Shui, and asked.
In the end,
it was already
he had been
daybreak
pondering
by
this
the time
question
he
for a
returned
long
to the
time.
shore after cultivating
It's
in the
a
water.
type of poison specially
However,
used to deal with
there were
bugs.
still no traces of them.
Renbochin flashed a bright
Renbochin
smile
lay beside the
at Chi Sitting.
bonfire and started to ponder.
I didn't expect you to know how
Could
to
something
use
have
poison.
happened?
Chi
Those
Sitting was
jade-waisted
surprised.
slaves might be difficult to
The
deal with,
aboriginals
but with
usually
the Empress
use
around,
poison by
there
smearing
shouldn't
the
be
venom
any
of
problems.
snakes and insects onto their
Renbochin
arrows.
still trusted the Empress.
However,
it was rarely used.
This was especially so when
This
the
was
Empress
because
already
only
knew
some
the
snakes
actual
and
strength of
insects'
the other
venom
party.
could kill their prey.
After
and
resting
humans
for
would
a
not be
moment,
poisoned
he
after
got up
eating
and
their
cooked
prey.
a pot of meat soup.
Furthermore, the
After drinking
aboriginals
it,
weren't weak.
he went back into the water to
Prey
cultivate.
that were easily poisoned weren't
Qin
very
Yuan
strong,
and Hong
so the
Wuan couldn't wait
aboriginals
any
didn't
longer
need to
and
resort
went to the
such
entrance of the
methods.
valley to wait.
After noon,
He
Renbochin
used venom
started
on
to
some
feel a
beasts
little
that were
anxious and
difficult to
wondered
deal
if he
with,
should go
but
and look
those
for them.
beasts were extremely resistant
At this
to venom.
moment, Qin Yuan
As a
and
result,
Hong Wuan's
the
shouts came
aboriginals
from outside
rarely
the
used
valley.
poison and
They
didn't
are
do
back.
much research on poisons.
He's back.
He didn't expect
Renbochin was
Renbochin
finally
to be good at
relieved.
using poison.
He sat there
This
and
surprised
slowly
him a
cooked
little.
the meat soup.
I'm even afraid
After
of
waiting
myself
for
when
a
I use
while,
poison.
everyone entered the valley.
Renbochin grinned,
Renbochin
revealing
took a
a set
closer
of
look
white
and
teeth.
saw that the Empress,
It
who
looked
was in the
especially
lead,
white
was
on his
fine.
blackened face.
Many of the winged
I have
cavalry
underestimated
warriors at
you.
the back were injured.
Chi Sitting thought
The
about
most
the
important
situation
thing
at
was
that
the
time
number
and
of people.
felt that this guy was indeed good at using
Renbochin did a
poison.
head count and found that
If
8
he
people
asked
were
Renbochin
missing.
what he was afraid of,
Your Majesty,
Renbochin would most likely tell
drink
him
some
that he was
soup
afraid
first.
of poisoning himself to death.
Renbochin scooped a bowl
I'll let
of
you
soup
use
for
the
the
great
Empress.
fireball technique.
After seeing her
The
raise her
Empress
head and
seemed to have
drink it
thought
in
of
one
something
gulp,
and angrily
he asked,
swung the rod
"Did
at
you encounter
Renbochin's
any
head
trouble
again.
this time?"
The Empress's face immediately
Renbochin
turned cold.
groaned through his nose.
Those jade-waisted
Chi
slaves
Sitting
are
looked at
indeed
Renbochin
powerful.
with a strange expression and then at
Fortunately,
the Empress.
I sealed those jade-waisted
He sighed
slaves in
and
the
said,
cave yesterday.
"Xiaoye, you have changed.
Otherwise, I might not
Forget
have been
it,
able to
you
take
have
down that
grown up."
herdsman. I won't say
Renbochin's
anymore.
heart trembled.
The Empress didn't
Those
react
jade-waisted
at first,
slaves,
but when she
who
saw
had
no
Chi
one to
Sitting
command
sad,
them,
she
had suddenly
injured so many
realized
people
something,
under the
and her
Empress's
face
watch,
turned red.
and 8 winged cavalry
She gritted
warriors
her
had
teeth
died.
and looked at Chi Sitting
If
and
there was someone
Renbochin
commanding them,
they would have
she
to
really
pay a
wanted
huge
to bury
price
these
to wipe
2
out
guys
the 30
under the
herdsmen.
palace.
Obviously,
Renbochin
this
was
was
also
also
what
what
Chi
the
Shui
Empress was
sighed
worried
for an
about.
entire day before he was
The
put
news
down
that
by the
Zidong
Empress.
Lai had conquered the Yun
He
nation's
tidied up the
capital
dust
only
on
made
his
everyone
face and
happy for
whispered
half
into
a
her
day.
ear,
Your Majesty.
However,
I just
the
discovered
appearance of the
something
herdsmen
very
and the
important.
jade-waisted slaves
What
made
is
everyone
it?
tense up again.
The Empress was a little
After
annoyed
everyone
at first,
rested for a while,
but she immediately
the Empress
suppressed
sent
her
everyone
other
out to
thoughts
the
when she
family
saw how
village to
serious
contact
he
the
was.
winged cavalry warriors who had gone to
Renbochin looked at
recruit.
Chi Shui with a
There
strange
were more than
expression
30
and said,
herdsmen, Your
and the
Majesty,
Empress's
I
subordinates
was
weren't
hung by
enough
Chi
to deal with
Shui's
them.
side just now,
The rest
and
of
my
the
head
people
was
went
about
to
the
look for
same
the
height
winged
as its
cavalry
abdomen.
warriors.
Gongzheng
I discovered
and
that
Lin
Chi
Xiaola.
Shui is a female. If they encountered the
Bam.
herders, these people might not be able to
Renbochin was
return.
kicked into a tree by the
Your
angry
Majesty,
Empress.
did you bring back the
As
corpses
soon as
of
he
the
jumped
jade-waisted
down,
slaves?
he was knocked to the ground by Chi
Renbochin
Shui,
asked,
whose scales had exploded.
I will bring them
and
back to
trampled
see if I
on.
can find their weaknesses.
Steam was coming out of Chi Shui's nostrils.
At present, he only knew that
Renbochin
herdsmen
held
were
his head
extremely
and stole a
fast
glance
and could
at
use
Chi
their names
Shui's
to
lower
perform some
body.
tricks. He was
As
sure
long
that it
as
was
they were on
indeed a
guard,
female.
there wouldn't be too much danger.
After another 2 days,
No matter
the Crow
how
General
fast the
carried a
herdsmen
few
were,
more big
their
bags
bodies
on its
weren't
back,
strong.
containing bottles
The
of
biggest threat
third-generation
was the tens of
insecticide.
thousands of jade-waisted
Everyone
slaves.
finally arrived at their second
The results
destination,
this time also
where
proved this
Gongzheng
point.
and Lin Xiaola had
The
disappeared.
Water Empress frowned and
According
shook
to
her
the
head.
previous
After
arrangement,
the demonic
everyone was
butterflies
prepared
die,
to follow
they
the
will shrink into a
jade-waisted
ball and
slaves after they
disintegrate
left
into
before
ashes.
daybreak. As she
Renbochin
spoke,
hated
the Empress
herdsmen
glanced
here
at
even more.
Renbochin and swallowed her words.
After all, this was where
On
Lin
the way
Xiaola
back,
died.
she had been thinking for a
Every
long time.
time he thought of that girl with a
Whether
pair
it
of
was the
eyes,
fact that
he
the
felt that it was
jade-waisted
a pity.
slaves had the appearance of their
After her
host or that they would
disappearance,
turn into
he
ashes
felt that it
after
wasn't
death.
bad to have
She
such a
felt that the
person by his
jade-waisted
side wasted slaves had something to do with divine
All
souls.
she did was eat and sleep.
If there was a
and she would
technique
feed them
that
a few
specialized
sweets
in
whenever
attacking
she
the
felt
soul,
like
it would probably have a great effect on the jade-wasted slaves. Usually, she wouldn't show off
the
her
ancient race
existence
was
in
not
front of
good
him.
at this.
It was probably
Renbachin,
similar to
on
raising
the other
a cat,
hand,
had a chance with
Most
his technique.
importantly,
even though she had a pair of as,
he was still
a delicate and pretty female beast.
In that case,
she was a living person.
See how the Messier 87
she even accompanied him to the north and
corpses
south
of the jade-wasted slaves.
This made Renbochin feel upset every time he thought about it.
The closer he got to this
place,
he came back with
this
two
feeling
wooden
boxes in his hands.
However,
what are these?
When he picked up his binoculars and looked into the forest in the distance,
are there any results from the research?
He saw a little girl with a pair of us with disheveled hair catching butterflies in the forest.
I did bring something back.
Wherever those jade-wasted slaves landed,
said with
she would
crouch
down and stare at them. The Empress looked at him with a puzzled expression,
occasionally catching one
and
stuffing it into her mouth with a satisfied look on her face.
She and Renbochin had the same idea on this point.
Who was Lin Chaola?
Yes.
This made Renbochin tremble on the spot.
The Empress asked again.
He was agitated and angry from time to time.
Renbochin was speechless.
You came here to protect Gongzheng.
As soon as he returned,
now that
he
hurried
has
to the Messier 87
you are catching butterflies here. When he was about to leave,
Renbochin had the thought of burying
which made him
curse out loud.
After his anger
he
subsided,
never expected that the Messier 87 department would actually give him such things.
By the Empress.
Insecticide.
What would she do?
Of course,
would she let
it was
her
a
off?
special insecticide.
Given the Empress's temperament,
although the Messier
there was a
87
department
hadn't made much progress with the demonic butterfly after such a thing had happened.
They had researched something and produced
there was no
a special
news
insecticide.
Of Gongzheng
and Lin Chaola was
as
here
for the
chasing
effects,
butterflies.
no one knew.
There was also
After
a
all,
10%
there weren't
chance
any
that
living
she would
things
kill
to
Lin
experiment
Chaola before
on.
burying her.
The Messier 87
Regardless of Lin
department had
Chaola's
only done some
identity or the
research
relationship
and determined
between
that some
her and the
things might be
Empress.
effective on
The
them.
Empress couldn't let this matter
After
go so
listening
easily.
to Renbochin, the Empress wasn't disappointed.
Not only would she let down Gongzheng,
at least she could
but
give
she
it
would
a
also
try.
let down those winged cavalry
for them
warriors
to come
who
back.
had disappeared in this area.
Continue to practice.
Even Renbochin felt that he shouldn't let Lin Chaola off.
Took off his clothes,
whether it was
into the
national
water,
law
and continued
family
to practice.
rules, or human relationships.
After 5 days,
there was no
the
reason
winged
to
cavalry
forgive her.
warriors began to come
This
back
made
one after
Renbochin
another.
have mixed feelings.
However,
they didn't stay
he was
long
resentful
before
that Lin
setting off to
Chaola
hunt
didn't
in the
meet his
distance.
expectations, but he
Food
also
was a
couldn't
big
bear it.
problem here. However, as some people came back and some went hunting,
Chapter
the valley could always
77.
maintain around 70 to 80 people,
Renbochin's
which made it a lot
changed.
livelier. He knew that he couldn't hide
also
this matter,
found some
so
time
he
to
said
go back to
softly,
Earth and
Lin
bring
Chaola
back the
is in
second-generation
forest.
insecticide.
Lin Chaola
In
is
addition
in the
to
forest.
killing insects,
it
what
also
about
had a volatile
Gongzheng?
and flammable effect.
The Empress was a little surprised
Half a month
and
passed,
happy,
and Renbochin had
didn't
been
see her.
practicing in the pond for nearly 2.5
Renbochin
months.
shook his head.
It seemed that with the repeated struggle between the cold and
the
heat,
Empress asked
as
again.
well as the recovery of the essence
What's the
chi in his
situation
body,
with Lin
there were
Chaola?
some
The
unexpected
Empress
changes
asked
to his
again.
body's surface and muscles.
I'm not sure.
His body had grown
Renbochin
even
said
bigger.
hesitantly.
In just
The
10
Empress
days,
instantly
his body
appeared
had become
beside him,
thicker,
took
as
the
if he had been
binoculars
blown
from his
up,
hand,
looked ahead,
at a glance,
and asked,
he was one.
Where is she?
75
However,
meters
she
tall
saw
and
it
weighed
without
at least
Renbochin's
150 kilograms.
Renbochin felt a gust of wind
all
blow
of his
past
muscles
him.
were bulging.
From the corner
He
of
was
his
almost
eye,
the type
he
that
saw a
strangers
red
didn't
figure
want to get
flash
close
and
to.
disappear. If one stood
Brother-in-law,
among the Aboriginals,
they
Her
wouldn't be
Majesty
able to
has
distinguish
rushed
him
over
from afar.
Renbochin
However,
shouted at
one
the
would be
bottom
able
of
to
the
see
tree
him
when they
followed
got
her.
closer.
The forest
After
was like
all,
a group of
his
demons
face was much
dancing in a
fairer than
frenzy.
the Aboriginals.
Groups of jade-wasted
Renbochin
slaves
was
filled
somewhat
the
aware
forest,
of this change,
lying on the ground or on the tree
first
trunks,
step was almost
causing
complete.
the forest to be filled with a dark
What was
green
left
glow.
was to strip a portion of the essence
Occasionally,
chi from the
a
circulation of
jade-wasted
the
slave
internal
would fly
organs
up,
and hammer
and it
it
was a
into the surface
breathtakingly
of the body
beautiful
and
sight.
muscles. If one
When
were
this
to
step
say
was
that it was a
completed,
beautiful
his
scenery,
defense would be
then this
greatly
forest
enhanced.
was a little strange.
At the very least,
a pretty girl
he
in a
wouldn't
dirty
be seriously
tube top and
injured by a
shorts was in the
casual punch
forest.
from the Empress.
From time to time,
He would then be
she
able
would
to enter
pounce
the
on a
bridal
group of
chamber with
jade-wasted
peace of
slaves,
mind,
scaring them into
However,
the air.
the Empress's expression
The girl
was
would grab
extremely
one and
ugly
stuff
at
it
this
into her
moment.
mouth as if she was tasting
It wasn't
something
just
delicious.
All the
She
winged
closed her
cavalry
eyes
warriors
and reveled
in the valley
in it for a
looked
moment.
grave.
Not
15
long
days
after,
had passed,
the girl curled
and
up
there
on
were
the
still
ground,
some people
either
who
because
hadn't
she was
returned.
full or because she was tired.
This included the three groups
She
and
hugged
the
her
people who
knees
went
and
to look
curled
for
up
them.
as much as possible.
There was
just
no
like a
news at
baby in a
all.
mother's womb.
The furthest
At this
direction that these
time,
people
a
had
red figure
explored was a
landed in
journey
front
of
of the
6
forest
days.
and stared at the girl.
Among these three
Lin
groups,
Chaola.
one of them was Gongzheng,
The
and
Empress's
Lin
voice
Chaola.
was cold and full of
Your
murderous
Majesty,
intent. With Lin Chaola's
In
speed,
fact,
she
the
should be
Empress
fine.
and Lin Chaola had a good
Renbochin
relationship.
came out of the earth in spring.
Lin Chaola
picked
had
up
been
a
in the
bath
palace
towel
longer than
and
the
wiped
Empress,
his body before
and she always
walking
had
to
the
image
image
of
of
a
a
young
young
girl.
The
When
Empress's
the Empress
expression
was young,
turned cold,
she felt
and
that
she
Lin
remained
Chaola
silent.
was like an elder sister.
Lin Chaola's speed
As
was
she
indeed
gradually
fast,
grew up,
but
Lin
those
Chaola
herdsmen
became
weren't
a
slow
younger
either.
sister.
The most
Although they
important
didn't have
thing
a
was
deep
whether the
relationship,
two of them had
it
fallen
wasn't
for
shallow
other tricks.
Therefore,
for example,
when Lin Chala got the white
names.
rabbit creamy candy
If
from
Renbochin
hadn't
she
spouted
immediately
nonsense
ran
that
to
day,
the Empress to
he
present
probably
it.
wouldn't have known that
It
he
was
had fallen for
precisely
the other
because of
party's
their
tricks
friendship
that Lin Chala appeared here after Gong Jing disappeared. Chapter 769.
One could imagine how furious the Empress was.
As more than 15 days passed,
the Empress's
everyone's
appearance
worries
instantly
grew
startled
heavier
the
with each
jade-waisted
passing
slaves
day.
in the forest.
With each passing
They flew
day,
up and circled
the
in the air
probability
like
of those who
ribbons
didn't
of
receive
lights.
any news coming back was
Lin
lower.
Chala's curled-up body was
Every
now
day,
lying on the ground.
someone guarded a mountain pass
Her
that was
limbs
one
were
day's
maintained at
journey
a certain
away,
angle,
as if she
that
was ready
was the
to
only
pounce
way
at any
back.
time. But unfortunately,
A small
there
face
was no
stared
news
at the
from
Empress
them.
expressionlessly.
Renbochin gradually
You want to
couldn't
fight
laugh
with me?
anymore. Looking at
Although
this
Lin
situation,
Chala only
the
knew
water
how to
Empress
eat and
laughed.
sleep.
She was still quite an interesting little girl. She accompanied
However,
him to the north
even
and south,
Renbochin,
escorted him to
chasing
see
after
city
him,
and Tianjin
could feel the
Basin.
killing intent as if he was
Although
being
she
pricked
didn't
by
contribute
needles.
much, she still
Your
spent a lot of
Majesty.
time with Renbochin.
Renbochin landed
Other than
behind
the Empress and the guards
said,
around him,
Your Majesty,
Lin Chala had
don't
been
be
by his
anxious.
side the longest. Lin Chala
If
is
she
a
were to
little
die
strange.
here,
even though Renbochin
Since
had
when did
died
Lin
so
Chala
many
dare
times
to
and was
act like an
indifferent to life
animal in
and
front of
death,
His Majesty?
he would still feel that it was
This
a
in
pity.
itself isn't normal.
After spending so much time
Renbochin
together,
said anxiously.
there would always be some feelings.
The Empress gradually calmed
even
down
though Lin
after hearing
Chala
what
always
Renbochin
slept
said.
and didn't make her presence felt.
You're right.
While everyone waited for
Renbochin
news,
carefully stared at Lin
Renbochin
Chala
persisted
and
in his
said,
training.
Your Majesty,
After
look at her
another
eyes.
5 days, the
They
essence
have
energy
vertical
in
pupils.
Renbochin's body began to
The
be
Empress
tempered into
looked
his
at Lin
skin and
Chala
muscles.
seriously.
As a result,
Indeed,
he needed
as
to eat a lot
Renbochin
of
said,
food every
Lin
day to
Chala's
replenish his
pupils were
essence
vertical
energy.
and oval.
If he
There
had
was
to
even a
describe
little
it,
green
it
color
would probably
hidden in
be
her
the feeling
pupils.
of eating ginseng,
Your
Pylos
Majesty,
antler.
do you still
sea
remember that
cucumber,
boar
and
asked us for our
wolfberry to
names
nourish
back
his
then?
body? After that,
Every day,
the second
he had
herdsman
to eat
also
3
asked
men
us
will
about our
level
names,
beasts.
transform them into
I was
essence
curious
energy,
about what would happen
and then
if they
temper
knew
them
our
into his
names.
skin to experience the
Now
feeling
that I
of
see
emptiness.
Lin Chala's condition,
Then
I have some
he would
conjectures.
climb ashore and continue eating.
If those herdsmen can control
this
a
kind
person
of
through
feeling
their
was
name,
really not
then
a
it
good
makes
one.
sense.
However,
That explains why the
energy
ancient
was
race
tempered
beings
into
would
his
come
skin
here
and
without a
muscles step by
sound
step
and die in silence
Renbochin's
one
skin
by
began
one.
to become denser.
It also makes sense
The hair
why
on
Lin
his body
Chala
began
like
to fall
this,
off,
Renbochin
including his
said
hair and
thoughtfully.
other parts of his body.
The Empress remained silent
gave
after hearing
Renbochin a
this.
shock.
My
Renbochin's
bird is
conjecture
bald.
seemed to be very likely.
This is a big deal.
She suddenly felt a
Some
sense of
people say that
anticipation
nothing
and
matters
hoped that
except
things were
life
really
and
as
death.
Renbochin said.
Nonsense.
If possible,
She
didn't want to
Renbochin
kill
felt
this
that many
girl,
things were
who
more
hadn't
important
changed
than
much
life
in
and
more than
death.
20 years. In addition to being
She's
bald,
sitting, Ba Man,
Renbochin's skin
and the others
began to
landed
become
beside
as
the
silky
Empress
as milk.
and
looked at the dancing
As he
jade-waisted
stood
slaves
there,
in the
his
forest.
body reflected a faint
Most
light like metal.
importantly, they looked at the
The
girl
valley
lying
was
on the
always
ground.
dim and didn't have a strong light.
What's this?
So it wasn't too conspicuous.
She sitting asked with a frown.
However,
when Renbochin
Lin
returned to
Chala,
Earth, this problem was
Renbochin
completely
suddenly
exposed.
shouted.
After
Lin
staying
Chala,
for 5
who was
days,
lying on the ground,
Renbochin
suddenly
returned to
shivered.
Earth. Her
The
pupils
first thing he
narrowed
did
as if
was
she was
change his
startled by
clothes.
Renbochin's sudden shout.
He stood in front of the dressing
At this
mirror
moment,
and realized
a burst
that
of
he simply
desolate
didn't
music rang
recognize
out.
the person opposite him.
The jade-waisted slaves
After the
flew in
sunlight
the
from the
direction
window
of the
spilled
sound.
into the room,
The mirror
Lin Chala
reflected
lay
a
on the
bald head
ground
that
and
shone
retreated
like
more
a
than
light
10
bulb.
steps.
And that skin
Seeing
that
that
was
no one
radiating
had
a
any
strong
intention
luster.
of attacking,
She
it
turned
was
around
as if
and
a layer
quickly
of
fled
oil
into
had
the
been
forest.
smeared on it.
Go. A
The
300
Empress only
kilograms
said
fat
one
and
word
strong
before
man with a
slowly
body
walking
full
into
of
the
exquisite
depths of the
skin that
forest.
reflected the light.
At this point,
Just thinking
hiding
about
wasn't
it was
important
enough.
anymore.
Renbochin
The important
winked in
thing
front
was
of
to
the
take
mirror
down
for a
Lin
long
Chala
time.
and this herdsman.
In the end,
Not
his
long
face
after
drooped.
they entered the forest,
With his current
Renbochin
appearance,
suddenly
he
stopped
couldn't
and
even
said
leave
with
the
an indescribable
now.
emotion, Your Majesty.
He sighed and went downstairs.
I see Gong Zhang.
It was currently autumn
The
on
Empress
Earth.
turned her head abruptly
The
and
12
saw that he
winged
was
cavalry
staring at a
warriors
tree.
were bored in the courtyard
On the
and were
bark
using
of that
large
tree,
boulders as
there was a human
exercise equipment.
face.
Seeing
The
someone
appearance of that
push open
face
the
sent a
door
chill
and come on
down
the Empress's
everyone
spine.
first took a look,
It
and
was
then
Gong
they were all
Zhang.
shocked.
The face
Lady
on the tree
Boss,
was
you
distorted,
lit up,
full of pain.
His
and its
accent
mouth
sounded
was
like,
wide open.
Lady Boss, you're cold.
Renbochin
Although it
raised
appeared
his
on the
arm.
surface of the tree's bark
Sure
and was
enough,
somewhat different
under the
from a
direct
human
sunlight,
body,
his
one could
entire
still tell
arm
that
was
it looked
reflecting
very
light.
similar to Gongzheng.
It gave people the feeling that
Captain of the
it was
winged
glowing.
cavalry.
If even his arm looked like this, there was no need to think about how others looked at him.
His walking stick at
Although there was still a considerable
like
gap
this is
compared
worse
to the
than
reflection
death.
of metal, this kind of
Bang.
situation was eye-catching
The
enough
Empress
when it
swung
appeared
her
on a
walking
human
stick
body.
away.
He was
Why
simply a
stop
man
me?
with a halo.
Chi sitting looked
A
at
body
the
that
Empress.
glowed under the sunlight.
This tree is him,
Ren
right?
Butch inside.
It's
Turned
better to
around
die than to
and
live
went back
like
into the
this.
house. Capture Lin
first
Chaola
called
and
Yang
the herdsmen
Sen
to find out about the progress of the research on the jade-wasted slaves.
Maybe we can find out something
after we capture
he went
the
out of the
herdsmen,
house,
Renbachin
summoned
said.
his golden spear,
He
and
finally
practiced for
knew
a
why
long
he
time.
felt that the forest was strange
After
before.
waiting for 2 days,
He
turned
returned
out
to
that this
Deo
forest
with the
that was
third
bearing its
generation
fangs and
insecticide.
brandishing its claws was
As soon
transformed
as he
from a
landed,
single person.
he opened his eyes
This
and saw the
truth was
solemn
simply
faces
terrifying.
of everyone.
At this
Still
moment,
not back.
he still held on to a glimmer of
Renbachin
hope that the
swallowed this
herdsman could
sentence that
actually
was on the tip of
transform
his
people like
tongue.
this. He could tell
Perhaps
just by
there was a
looking
way
at
to
everyone's
save them.
expressions. However,
It had
he
already
also
been
knew
21
that this hope
days.
was extremely slim.
It seemed like those
Get
people
someone
were
to
really
keep an
in
eye
trouble.
on this place.
That included
Let's
the girl
go.
who was always sleeping and
After
drooling
saying
in
this,
Qingxin Palace
the Empress
Hall.
turned away from the tree
She
and
had a
walked into
delicate
the depths
appearance
of the
and a
forest
pair of
with a
A's.
solemn expression.
At the thought
Her
of this,
red dress fluttered
Renbachin's
despite
mood
the absence
worsened.
of wind.
He turned
Her
his head
hair
and
also
decided to
fluttered
practice
behind
martial
her.
arts.
With the Empress
After
as
another
the center,
5 days,
the coldness spread in all
Renbachin felt that he had
directions,
changed
causing
from a matte
everyone
to a
to
high
feel
gloss.
cold all over. The surface of his skin seemed to be covered with a layer of film. As long as he gave himself
Chapter
a layer of light,
778.
he would be able to shine.
Before the group left the
He was like
forest,
an unparalleled
they saw a large
superstar.
green light surging towards them.
At this point, everyone
Gather
no
in
longer
place
had
and
any
get ready to
expectations
kill.
for Gong Zhang and
Qi
Lin
Sitting
Chaola.
shouted.
Everyone was
Kill.
filled with pent-up anger and
More
was
than
ready to avenge
1,000
Gong
winged
Zhang.
cavalry warriors shouted
Now,
at the same
they
time.
were waiting for the people who had
The
gone
leads
to
in
the
the family
family
shot
village
up
to
into the
return.
sky, forming a green
After a few
pillar
days,
that connected to the
everyone
sky.
was sent out again.
It was as if everyone's
This time,
murderous aura
the
had
task given
condensed
by
into
the
a
Empress was to
substance.
look for jade-wasted
The
slaves
trees
in
and
the mountains
strange
at
rocks
night.
in front of the winged cavalry
If they
were
found
flattened
any,
and
they were
charged
to
toward the
immediately
incoming
retreat and never
jade-wasted
approach
slaves.
them.
The
After
jade-wasted
another 5
slaves
days,
danced in the air
Renbachin
and
drew
felt
an
that he
arc
could
in the
change
crowd
his
from
name to
time to
Golden
time.
Glitter.
The
Why are
winged
you
cavalry
frowning?
warriors and jade-wasted
The Empress
slaves
saw
were
that
armed with
Renbachin's
mace,
face was
giant
twitching.
axe, long saber, and long
Even
stick
though
that
she
was
was in
as
a
thick as
bad
an
mood
arm.
recently, she still
Some of them
softened her
even
tone
used
and
the thigh
asked,
bones of unknown beasts
I
as
never
weapons.
thought that I would be so bright
These
after
weapons were
practicing
like
this
bears
technique.
dancing with butterflies against these
Renbachin
little
expressed
guys.
his bewilderment.
The scene wasn't
The
very
Empress
pleasant.
sized him up.
The winged
In
cavalry
fact,
warriors,
anyone who wasn't
had
blind
great
could
strength
see
and
his
rough
situation.
moves, hated these small
It couldn't
and
be
agile
more
opponents
appropriate
the
to
most.
say that he would shine brightly
Moreover,
if given some
the
sunlight.
jade-wasted slaves had the
It's all
advantage in
right.
numbers, and there were
There
at least
wasn't much
10,000
difference
of
from
them.
before.
Fortunately,
The Empress
the
said.
average strength of the jade-wasted
Renbachin
slaves was
silently
only
took
at
out
the
a
manual
flashlight
level
and
or
shone
even
it on
lower.
his face.
Although they were
Suddenly,
agile,
his
they
face
were much
lit up.
slower than the winged cavalry
Your Majesty,
warriors.
are you serious?
The scene was ugly,
The
and
Empress
hundreds
thought
of
about it.
jade-wasted slaves fell
She
every
wanted
minute.
to say it was true,
However,
but she couldn't bring
there were more
herself
than
to say something
10,000
that went against her
jade-wasted
heart
slaves in the
because of her
training
moral
hall,
integrity.
and there were
She
1,600
said
winged
softly,
cavalry
it's
warriors.
pretty good.
This
My
kind of
husband
speed
should
was
be a
rather
radiant
slow.
man.
Those
Renbachin
jade-wasted
pondered for a
slaves have a
while and
formation.
said with a proud expression,
Renbachin
radiant man.
discovered this problem with a
Do you
glance.
mean this kind of radiant man?
Although the jade-wasted
You can say
slaves were
that.
falling in large numbers,
The Empress
they were
sat
on
on
a
a
rock
rock
in
and
an
looked
orderly
down.
manner. She
There was
hugged
also a
Renbachin's
flute-like
neck
music
and
coming
pulled
from
him
afar,
closer to her,
which
must be how the jade-wasted
Then,
slaves
she
were
lowered her
commanded.
head and kissed his forehead.
Not bad. She then
The
pushed
Empress
Renbachin
nodded.
further away and
After
carefully
Boar's
sized
death,
him up. The jade-wasted
she
slaves
smiled
didn't know
and
what to
said,
do and
"This is
circled
pretty
in front of the
good."
mountain. Renbachin
This was how they
sighed
were
and said,
eliminated by
yes,
the winged
the
cavalry
next
with
time there
minimal
are
effort.
assassins. There's no
The guards
need to
behind
look for a target.
Renbachin opened a box
It's
and threw a
definitely
bunch
right
of glass
to attack
bottles
the
at the
brightest
crowd.
one. As
Librarian
Librarian
Lin
never
quickly
mentioned
spread
this
in the
before,
air,
and
the
he
scene
didn't
immediately
expect it at all.
changed,
And the
Who
jade-wasted
would have thought
slaves
that
in
this
the air
technique
began
would
to
have such
slow
a side
down.
effect?
At this time,
Renbachin
being
only
slow
hoped
meant
that
this was
death.
only half the effect of
The
practicing this
jade-wasted
technique,
slaves
and
that
that it
would
would
return
return
to
to
its
its
original
original
state
state
after
after
completing
completing
the
the
first stage.
The winged cavalry
In
warriors
addition,
at the scene
Renbachin's
immediately let out a
defense had
carefree
indeed
laughter.
increased greatly.
Even though these little things
Previously,
weren't considered
he could make
strong,
a cut with a
they were
knife,
very troublesome
but now,
to deal with.
it was as if he was cutting
Once
an
these
iron plate and
transparent
only
crystals
left a
were
mark
thrown
on his
over,
skin.
these things would fall one after
Renbachin gave
another.
himself a hard punch and
Even a
felt that the
mace would
force
be
of
able
that
to
punch
hit
had
one
been
or two of
dispersed to a
them.
large area of his
At
body
this moment,
surface.
a black shadow
The
suddenly
essence
darted
energy
into
that
the
had been
arena
hammered
and
into
headed
the
straight
surface
for
of
the
his body
bodies
had
behind
fused with his
Renbachin
cells and connected them together.
Bang! When one cell was attacked, the Empress's palm, the surrounding cells figure was immediately sent flying. A blow that could slightly injure him in the past didn't feel much now. His head was upside down, and his limbs were grabbing onto the tree trunk. A blow that could seriously injure him in the past still seriously injured him now. Although Lynchall's face the essence energy no matter how hammered into the surface of his body was limited, when paired with the amount of attack that could be sustained was also limited, it looked a little creepy. In other words, if an expert who was far more powerful than Renbachian wanted to kill him, laughter came from the darkness. It wouldn't be any different from before.
There are so many guests
caused to
today.
Rinpoche by an expert
They were all
of the same level would be
top-notch
greatly
nourishment.
reduced.
Should I thank you
If
for
it was
coming
an
to my
expert
door?
who was weaker than Rinpoche,
Trying to mystify
they might have
us.
been able to injure him by surprise.
The Empress
in the
kicked a
past.
rock and ran into the
Now,
darkness.
it could at most be
Come
considered
out.
a massage. 10 breaths later, the herdsman in the darkness looked behind him with a puzzled
Chapter
expression.
770.
Who was he hitting? Rinpoche felt that his wedding
one
would
was
probably
there.
have to be postponed.
However,
he quickly
his wedding with
suppressed his
the
doubts
Empress was
and
getting
looked at the
closer and
Empress and the
closer.
rest in the forest.
Of the 9 months,
He let out a
7 months
crisp
had
laugh
already
and said,
passed.
"This half-human with an
It was
ancient
already
bloodline
late
is
January
yours,
in
right?
Dayo's 73rd year.
I didn't
and there was
expect to
still
meet her
1.5
here.
months before the wedding.
How lucky. Rinpoche had already
Unfortunately,
completed
you
the
came
first
too
stage
early.
of his training.
If you had come
His
a
whole
little
body
later,
was still
I could have
illuminated,
trained her and
shown
even
you
his
the true
forehead was
power of the
glowing.
ancient bloodline.
His original hope
Are
of
you
returning
referring
to
to
a
the
matte
chinchilla
look had been
bloodline?
dashed, and he had no choice
Rinpoche
but to
raised
apply
his
a layer
voice
of
and
foundation,
asked.
the kind used
He
by
had
women
heard
to
this
put
from
on
cheese
makeup.
sitting.
This
You
made the
actually
situation
know
a
about
little
it.
better.
The herdsman was
However,
puzzled
it
at
was
first,
fine if he
but
didn't
then
exercise
understood.
intensely. But if
She
he
has been
did,
like this
the
because you
foundation
don't know
would
how to
immediately
stimulate
fall
the
off.
chinchilla bloodline.
According to Rinpoche,
It's a pity that you
even
have
a
such a
mosquito
powerful
that landed
weapon
on his
but don't know
forehead
how
would
to
slip.
use it.
This
But that's
wasn't
an
right.
adjective.
You
Your
abandoned people
Majesty,
have long
it's
forgotten
about
about
time,
those things.
right?
It's already beyond my
casually asked as he
expectations to
sat
know
beside
that she
the
has the
Empress.
chinchilla bloodline.
The 150-kilogram man
people.
was holding a mirror in
What
one
do you
hand
mean?
and applying
The
powder
Empress
to his
asked
face with
coldly.
the other.
Unfortunately,
since you have forgotten
as he
about
spoke,
it, I won't tell
the powder
you.
fell off as he
The
applied
herdsman in the darkness said.
After a few minutes,
You will die
Rinpoche
if you
lost
don't
his
finish your
patience
sentence
and threw the mirror away.
Rinpoche
The
sighed.
Empress nodded.
Die.
The people who went to the
You can
family
talk
village
after you
had been
defeat
gone
the
for 2
half-human
months,
with the
and
chinchilla
it was about
bloodline.
time for them to return.
The herdsman laughed
Are
in
there
the darkness.
7 people who have been identified?
Then, the sound of a flute
Rinpoche
could be
placed
heard.
his hands on the ground and
Lin
rested his
Chaola's
head on the
face
thigh
revealed
of the
a
Empress,
painful expression.
who was sitting on a rock.
Her teeth began to
The
grow
veil
longer,
fell to
and
one
her body
side,
seemed to have
and the
grown
back
a
of
size
Rinpoche's
larger.
head touched the
Her
Empress's
clothes
skin.
were tightly wrapped around her body.
Rinpoche felt that it was very
A
slippery.
pair of A's had become a pair of
It wasn't
C's.
the Empress's leg that was slippery,
This shocked
but the back
Rinpoche.
of his head that was slippery.
At this
There are
time,
8.
Lin Chaola wasn't just
The
a
Empress
size
said.
larger.
Recently,
Her figure had
the
also
Empress
become
had
more
sent
voluptuous,
people out to
and
investigate
her exquisite
separately,
curves had become more attractive.
including the locations of the
Her
3
face
missing
was even
teens.
more seductive.
They had only found the locations
After
of 8
taking a
herdsmen.
closer look,
The
Rinpoche saw
60,000
something that
mountains were
shocked
too
him even
big.
more.
This
Tail.
area was too big.
Rinpoche
During
suddenly
this process,
realized that there
the
was a
winged
tail
cavalry
sticking out of
suffered
Lin
more than
Chaola's
20
skirt.
casualties. It was a very
Only
short,
a few of them
gray,
died at the
and
hands of
fluffy
the
tail.
herdsman.
Brother-in-law,
Most of them died
stop
under the
him.
claws of various beasts
Even though
in the
Lin
mountains.
Chaola looked pretty good,
Even the winged
Rinpoche
cavalry,
still didn't
who were at
dare
the
to let her
earthly
continue
level,
and
were at
hurriedly
great
shouted.
risk in an unfamiliar area.
Humph. I hope they
Cheese
won't
sitting
notice and
snorted.
gather together.
He tapped his crutches on the
Rinpoche
ground and
frowned.
swooped into the darkness like
One
a huge
herdsman was
eagle.
already very difficult to deal with. If all
At
of
this
them
moment,
gathered
a
together,
figure
it would
pounced
be
out
a
of the
disaster.
darkness and collided with cheese
They
sitting
should have
in the
noticed
air.
it.
Boom.
However, there aren't any
The
signs of them
jade-waisted
gathering
slaves
at the
around
moment.
them were sent flying.
At least, this
Even
seems
the
to be the
soil
case
and
from the
stones on the
surveillance
ground
of the
were
8
shaved
herdsmen.
off.
The Empress
Both of
placed
them
her
were
hand
sent
on the
flying
top of
backward.
Rinpoche's head.
Rinpoche had
Killed
sharp
by
eyes
touching
and
the
saw
head.
that there was a snake's tail
Even though
behind
it
that
looked a little
figure.
weird to others,
Ha ha
he
ha
felt
ha.
that it felt pretty good.
So powerful.
They are used to traveling alone.
Cheese-sitting landed in the forest
Before
laughed
encountering
a few
an
times,
absolutely
and swooped
powerful
into the
force.
darkness again.
They probably won't gather
At
together.
this time,
Lin
Rinpoche
Chaola
guessed.
also pounced toward them. Her
Some
speed
of
was
the
much faster
characteristics
than
of this
before,
race could be
and
seen
Rinpoche
from some of
couldn't
Bohr's
see her
words.
at all.
Natural,
The Empress's face
wild,
was instantly
cruel,
covered with
cold,
purplish-red
and
veins
lonely.
as she charged toward Lin
Everyone had
Chaola.
to use certain methods
The
to
two
forget
of them
their
exchanged
childhood
a
after
few
they
body
reached
positions
adulthood
in the air
to
before
prevent
stopping.
childhood memories from affecting
There was
their
almost
lonely
no
and long
sound of
lives in the
collision.
future.
Has
Rinpoche
the
looked
Emperor of
over
the
and
Yin
saw a
Nation
few
been sent to
patches of
Lan
white
City?
and purple on the Empress's
Rinpoche
waist and
asked.
abdomen.
There was
Yes,
also a
he
faint
wanted
red
to
seeping
escape,
out.
but Si Donglai caught him
However,
and sent
with a
him
wipe
to
of
Lan
her
City a
hand,
few
the
days
wound
ago.
disappeared, leaving
As for
only
that
snow-white
Shin-Chin,
skin and
he
purple
set himself
veins.
on fire.
However,
It is
the
said
red
that
muslin
someone
on her
heard him
body
scolding
and
the
the hole in
warlords
her
for
undergarments
surrendering without
couldn't
a
be
fight
wiped
while he
off.
was burning himself.
Rinpoche
The Empress
took
took a
she
deep
recalled
breath.
Zi Donglai's report.
According to the description
A
of the
wise
heavenly silkworm
dragging
circumstances.
This was simply terrifying.
Ren Baqian laughed.
The Empress was actually injured by Lin Chaola in one
to the
move.
surrender of those people.
Lin Chaola was lying on the ground with 3 limbs on the ground.
Also contributed a lot.
One of her hands was raised,
and she
hadn't
kept
forced them and held them back from the
making
beginning,
a sizzling
the
sound.
Yun nation wouldn't have been able to conquer the Yun nation so quickly.
Speaking of which, the people of the Yun nation still benefited.
Chapter 779.
Renbaqian continued.
The Empress's face was ice cold,
when Deo
but her
develops,
eyes were wide
I still
open.
want to implement a household
It was
registration
evident that she
system.
found it unbelievable that
This
she
will
had been
prevent the
injured
people
by
of
Lin
Great
Xiao
Xia and the Qin nation
in the
from
next
coming
second,
over.
the two of them were
To be a
entangled in the
citizen
air
of
at a
Deo,
speed that could
one
not
has
be
to
seen
spend a sum of
clearly.
money to buy an identity
There was
first.
almost no sound of collision
How's
between
the
the two,
resistance from the
but
Yun
trees
nation
fell
now?
out of thin air.
Two of the warlords
Marks
who
kept
surrendered
appearing
were
on the
killed.
ground.
They were
He.
assassinated by
How is he?
practitioners, the Empress
Did I
said.
teach him well?
The
herdsman's
killed
voice
7
came
or
from the
8 of the
darkness
sects
again.
in the vicinity,
What
which should
that
be
thing
enough
with a
to
snake
deter a
tail?
group of people.
Renbaqian
We have to
asked
use
as he
both
looked
kindness
around.
and authority.
That's Lu Xing.
I'm afraid that just killing
He
people
has the
won't be
bloodline
enough.
of Snake Xiu.
Renbaqian said.
What do you think?
It's fine
It
to
was
let
a
him
pity
kill
that she did
people,
not have
but
much
forget about
bloodline
these
and her
things.
upper limit was too low.
Let's deal with it this way
However,
for now.
it's more than enough to deal with
After
you.
all, it's beyond our
I would
control
like to
now.
thank you for sending me this half-human
We'll deal
with
with
the
the
blood
Yun
of a
nation
chinchilla.
after we return,
The
Empress
herdsman's
said
laughter
faintly.
was ear-piercing.
Although there was a radio
However,
station,
the current
it could only
situation
handle
was
some
indeed a
ordinary
little
matters.
troublesome.
The
Chi
current
sitting was
situation in the
entangled by
Yun
Lu
nation was
Xing,
complicated,
and the Empress
and it
was
was
entangled
difficult
by
to deal with it
Lin Xiao.
solely by relying on the radio
Furthermore,
station.
Lin Xiao's strength
According
had
to the
increased
Empress's
tremendously.
plan, she would personally
The two
go
of
to the
you
Yun nation
go and
after
give
her
that
wedding.
herdsman some trouble.
On one
Renbaqian
hand,
said to
she would
Ba Man
inspect
and
the mines,
Xiongnu,
and on the
who were
other
watching
hand,
the scene
she would deal
anxiously.
with the rebels in the Yun nation.
This place.
That night,
The two
a desolate
hesitated.
horn sound was heard from
You
afar.
guys won't be able to help either.
The sound of the horn was
Capture
desolate
the
and
ringleader
long,
first.
extremely deep, and moved
Renbaqian
people's
said as he
hearts.
looked at the scene.
As soon as it entered the
Although
ears,
Renbaqian
it
let
made
the two of
people's
them
souls
go,
follow
he
the
didn't
sound
have
of the
high
horn and pass
expectations.
through the mountains of the wilderness.
The two of them were much slower
The
than the
people
herder,
who were still
not
in the
to
valley
mention the
were
fact that the
immediately
herder was
invigorated.
obviously stronger than the previous
After a
two.
while, another horn sound came
Renbaqian
from the
frowned
entrance
as he
of the
pondered
valley.
if there was any solution.
However, this sound
At the
was
same
much
time,
weaker and didn't
he
have the
rummaged
same
through his bag to
soul-stirring
see if there was
feeling.
anything that could be used at this moment.
It was completely
He wondered
incomparable
if
to
the
the
large
sound of the
fireball
horn in the
spell would
distance.
work.
He's
It probably
finally
wouldn't
here.
cause too much damage.
Renbaqian got up and stretched.
Renbaqian opened a bag and
This horn
realized that it was
sound.
filled with sweets.
Brother is here.
He rolled his eyes
The
and had
Empress
an
frowned.
idea.
She
No matter
hadn't heard
what,
this sound
he had
for
to
a
give
long
it a try
time,
first.
and there weren't many horns that
Look
could
at
make
my
this
dove.
sound.
This was the
Renbaqian
only
took
one
two
that the
pieces of
Empress
dove,
had ever heard.
opened the packaging,
It
and
was
threw them into
Chi-Sitting's
the
most
arena.
beloved item.
Look at my gilly.
Renbaqian welcomed the
Look at
arrival
my
of his
Ferrero.
brother-in-law. Watch my
Although
Chi-Sitting's
Chi-Sitting's
legs were broken, he was
Look
still
at
a
my golden
top-notch
monkey.
expert. Look
Even
at my
if he was
white
disabled,
rabbit
he
creations.
He still wasn't someone that ordinary
Lin
people
Xiao
could compare
instantly
to.
appeared in the air and
An
caught the
expert
white
like him would
rabbit
be a
creamy
great help
candy
in the
her
elimination
mouth.
of the herdsman.
The Empress followed
After another
closely
2
behind and
hours,
struck her with
everyone
her
heard a
palm.
shout coming from afar.
Lin Xiao dodged in
Where's
midair.
Xiao?
A loud
In the
voice
empty
shouted
space
from
where she was
outside the
originally
valley.
standing.
The
Empress
Empress
got
got
up
up
from the
with a
rock,
radius of
tidied
3
her
meters,
clothes, and sat back
seeing
down.
that it was effective.
Tidying her
Renbaqian
clothes was for the
overjoyed.
sake of her appearance.
Sure enough,
She
she
had
sat
to use
back
the white
down
rabbit
because she was
creamy
the
candy
Empress.
to deal with Lin Xiao.
There was no reason for an
Look at my
Empress to
white
welcome
rabbit
other
creations.
A figure
Lin
broke through the
Xiao,
air
damn.
and appeared beside the two of them.
Big white rabbit.
Chi-Sitting stuck his
Damn.
walking stick into the soil
Big
and
white
carefully
rabbit.
looked at the Empress.
Damn.
Seeing that she was the
Bang.
same as always, he
The
smiled
Empress
and
slapped
said,
Lin Xiao,
I heard that you
who was
encountered
flying
some
in the
trouble,
air,
so
into
I
the
brought
ground.
reinforcements. The Empress got up and said,
The
Thank
Empress,
you, whose body was covered with purplish
I don't
red
like
veins,
hearing this.
landed and punched Lin
Chi-Sitting
Xiao
grinned.
repeatedly. I heard
Renbaqian
some of the
could
details.
feel the
ground shaking as if
Tell
there
me
was an
more.
earthquake. Chi-Sitting said with a serious
After a few
expression.
punches,
A large pig
how
with
many
a radius
people
of
did you
more
bring?
than 100
The
feet
Empress
appeared on the
asked.
ground.
The winged
Renbaqian
cavalry
lay at the
recruited
edge
more
of
than
the
2,000
pit and saw
people
the
a few
Empress
days
stand
ago,
up from Lin
but it's not
Xiao's
easy
body.
to transport food here.
The wrinkles on her face
As you
gradually
know,
faded away.
it's not easy to get food in
He's
the
not
mountains.
dead, right?
I picked 1,000 of the
Renbaqian
strongest
asked
people
worriedly.
and mobilized people from
He has
7 or
fainted.
8 villages to transport
The Empress
food.
said before disappearing
However,
into the pit.
I brought 2 cardinal heaven
Impossible.
experts with me.
How is
Their
this
village
possible?
isn't too far from the
Why are
family
you here?
village. How
If
can
I
you
had
defeat
more
a
time,
half-human
I
with
would
the
have
blood
been
of
able
a
to find
chinchilla?
more people.
A panicked
Chi-Sitting
scream came
felt
from
a little
afar.
regretful.
Renbaqian
When he was
felt that it was
investigating
much
the route
better
that
than
the
the previous
previous emperor
laughter
took,
from before.
He got to know many experts
You won't
in
understand the
the
world of a
mountains.
foodie. They are
Renbachian
indeed
looked
strong
relaxed.
reinforcements. The
Renbachian
Empress
jumped
was
into the
relieved to
pit
hear
and
that
looked
there
at
were
Lin
2
Chao.
Cardinal Heaven experts.
Her face looked like a
Including
half-human
her
after
and
being
she's
beaten by the
there were
Empress,
4 Cardinal
but her
Heaven
chest was
experts.
heaving up and down.
There were also more
She had
than
indeed
1,200 Kismet Heaven experts.
There were also a few pieces of
in
white
this
rabbit
way,
creation
they were
stained
strong
with
enough.
saliva in the soil beside
While the
her
2
mouth.
of them were talking, A large number of people
wiped the
poured
soil
into
off
the
the
valley.
white rabbit creations.
Many
and
of them
stuffed
had
into her
tattoos
mouth.
on their bodies and wore
He
clothes
stood up
made
and
of
looked
animal
at
skins.
Linchala.
Some
She
of them
was
had
about
bird
1.
feathers on their heads,
55
some had beast
meters tall
horns on their
before,
necks, but now
and some had fangs
she
on
looked
their
about the
necks.
same height as the Empress.
Renbachian even saw
Her
some of them
originally
wearing
skinny
shrunken
figure was
beast
much more
skulls.
voluptuous.
The
The
mounts
mounts
they
they
rode on were
very
also of all
conspicuous on
shapes
her
and
body.
sizes.
That
There were
delicate and pretty
saber-toothed
face,
tigers,
black,
He
white,
couldn't look at it
and
because
even
she had
red.
already become a half-human.
It was
He
a
then
giant
went to
bird
look
like
like
the
the crow
to
to
tie
tie
her up, but its feathers were bright
After
and shiny,
losing a pair of
and its
A's and
eyes
picking
shone
up a
brightly
pair
as
of
it looked
C's,
around.
Renbachian felt that
There
he
were
had made a
creatures
profit
that looked
this
like
time.
leopards, but they were
He
much
was in a
bigger
good
and had
mood.
3 horns on their heads.
He took off the leather clothes
There
of
was
a few
also a
winged
giant
cavalry
two-headed
warriors,
snake.
cut them into strips with a knife,
Renbachian even saw
twisted them into
people riding
ropes,
giant
and then
spiders.
hummed a tune while tying them
Ba
up.
man and
Don't think that I
pay
didn't
their
notice you
respects to
sneaking
your
out to meet her
majesty.
again.
The 2 people
Don't
in
ask
front
me
were
for
2
my
meters
opinion.
tall and had the body
There's
of a bear.
obviously something wrong with
They
your
exuded
eyes.
an extremely strong aura.
This is my last warning.
Upon seeing the Empress,
If you still don't
they
know how
cupped
to
their
behave,
fists and bowed.
get out of my
Shin
sight
Yong
with that
from
vixen.
Pingshan village pays his
Sir,
respects to your
what's a
majesty.
vixen?
A
Shin
few
Tian
winged
from
cavalry
Pingshan
guards
village
standing at
pays
the
his
side
respects
asked.
to your majesty.
The
The fight
Dalan
was
from
in
the
full
3rd village
swing.
on Mount Kaiyang.
A few
Xia
winged
Yang
cavalry
from the 3rd
warriors
village
threw
on Mount
insecticide
Kaiyang.
wherever
More
they
than
saw.
1,000
A lot of
people
people
got
got
off
off
their
their
mounts
mounts
and
and
bowed at the
completely
same
controlled
time.
the situation.
It was a mess.
That herdsman who abducted
Except for the
Linchala
first
is a
few
vixen.
words, Renbachian couldn't hear the
Renbachian
rest.
said casually and conveniently
Push a book
changed the
called
direction of
Real Estate
Linchala's
Players.
body. Don't expose yourself. This fellow actually
Chapter
wasn't wearing any
771.
underwear.
Although
After
these
thinking about
1,000 people
it
had
didn't
just
seem
been
very
recruited
good
by
for
the
her to
winged
be tied
cavalry,
up without
they
underwear.
didn't have much awareness of becoming
Renbachian
soldiers.
tore a piece of cloth from
They
his
spoke
body
in
and
unison,
put it on her,
one louder than the other.
He also
as if they were
conveniently
afraid
studied
that
how
the
her
Empress
tail
couldn't
grew
hear
and
them.
casually stroked it.
Coupled with the fact that
They
they were
called
from different
herdsmen,
mountains and
right?
villages,
I
Renbachian felt that
understand.
this scene was like the 36
Hideo,
caves
you're
and
also a
72
vixen,
islands paying a
right?
visit to Mount Tianshan.
Vixen is actually a relative
Or rather,
term.
it was more appropriate to say that there were 1,080 heroes
One of the
in
winged
Liangshan.
cavalry warriors suddenly
They gave
said.
off the vibe of a true
Renbachian
hero.
was stunned and blankly
All of
looked
you,
back at the
shut
winged
up.
cavalry warrior,
Chi
who
sitting
looked
turned
quite
his
young.
head and shouted.
I didn't expect
Everyone
you to comprehend
immediately
the theory
quieted
of
down.
relativity.
Chi Sitting's
Renbachian
prestige
was
in the
shocked.
hearts of these people was quite high.
This was Deus Einstein.
Even though he was crippled.
The theory of relativity
There
was
wasn't a
Einstein,
single cardinal
right?
heaven expert within
Report
500
to my
kilometers
school when
who
we get
hadn't been
back.
beaten up by him.
Renbachian
This
said.
kind of prestige was earned
It's a
through
waste
fighting.
for such a talent to be in the
What
winged
did I
cavalry.
teach you all along the way?
Sir,
Do you
still
all
think
not
it's
learn
pretty
from your
good to be in the
mistakes?
winged cavalry.
Chi Sitting
The
scolded
man
with a black
smiled
face.
embarrassedly.
Along the
Cut
way,
the crap.
Chi Sitting had already
What's your
divided
name?
them into teams with the winged cavalry
Renbachian
captain in
interrupted him.
charge.
However,
it became a mess once they
Renbachian
entered the
looked at the
valley.
winged cavalry warrior
Now
again
that they
and
saw
said,
Chi Sitting's
I'll
black
inform
face,
Her Majesty
there was
later.
chaos again.
Report to the school
They
when you
gathered
get
together
back.
in groups and were divided
You
into
can't
a few
refuse.
teams.
Renbachian
Sir, I
watched
can't
from the
read.
side and couldn't be
The
bothered to say
man's
anything.
face immediately turned bitter.
The discipline of these
You
aboriginals
can learn if
couldn't
you
be
can't
compared to
read.
that of the modern army.
It's a gift to be able to
Don't
comprehend
expect
this
this group
theory
of
of
brute force
relativity
and simple-minded people to
Renbachian
have much discipline.
lowered his head and continued
Even
to
the
tie
army
her
was
up.
like that, let alone
After a
these
while,
aboriginals.
he finally finished tying
Those
her
from
up.
Mount Gongmu, come
The
over
surrounding
here.
winged cavalry warriors
Coming.
couldn't bear to watch.
The name of this mountain was
They
outstanding,
shifted their gaze
and
to
the
the
voices
side
of these
and then
people
secretly
stood out from the
shifted their
crowd
gaze
as well.
back.
They were
It couldn't
actually
be
helped
helped
because
because Linchala's
voices
current
of
image
women.
was too attractive.
A few empresses
Her
emerged
figure
from
could
the
be said to be
crowd.
curvaceous.
They
and
were
now
all
that
in
she
their
was tied
teens
up by
and 20s,
Renbachian's
had bronze
tortoiseshell,
skin,
her
and wore
alluring
animal
parts were
skin
all
clothes
highlighted.
that tightly wrapped around their
It made
exquisite
people's
bodies.
mouths dry up.
They looked healthy
An
and
hour
wild.
later, the battle was coming
Each
to
of
an
them
end,
had a few
and
tail
the Empress
feathers on their
walked back
heads.
with a cold face.
The colorful birds that
Renbachian
Renbachian
didn't
saw
need
just
to
now
ask
were
to
the
know
birds
that the
they were
herdsmen had
riding
escaped
on.
just by looking at her
Gongyang,
face.
Gongyu,
However,
Gongxing,
the jade-waisted
Gongshan
slaves were left
of
here to
Mount
obstruct
Gongmu
everyone,
Shochuan village
and Lu
greets
Sheng
your
was
majesty.
also pestering Chi Sitting.
A few of the women
Even
came
if the
forward to
herdsmen
greet them and
escaped,
curiously
he wouldn't be
sized
able to
up the
cause any
Empress
trouble
from
for
the
the
corner
time
of their
being.
eyes. Did you tie
This was
her
the
up?
most distinguished woman in
The
Deo.
Empress's face immediately
The
turned
one
black
holding the
when
when she saw Lin Chaola being tied up by Rinpoche. Chi sitting shouted. Lin Chaola is a little difficult to deal with now. Another person came out of the crowd. So I used all the methods I could to restrict her movements. It was a man in his 20s, holding a chubby, knew that she would end up like this, and charmingly naive owl in his arms. Rinpoche looked at Lin Chaola doubtfully and then at his own hands as if he couldn't believe that he was the one who tied her up. These people are good at searching. When I heard about the situation, I asked someone to call them over. Chi sitting said to the Empress. Chapter 780. Elder brother.
Lu Xing still managed to escape in the end. She then looked at the rest of them and said, "Since all of you wanted to capture Lu Xing, since the herdsman wouldn't be able to cause much trouble, right? However, it wasn't easy to capture a herdsman with such strength. They flipped over and jumped down from the big birds. This was especially so in the middle of the night and in a completely unfamiliar forest. They patted the bird's wings a few times and made a goo-goo sound for almost an hour and couldn't even see Lu Xing's shadow before returning into the sky. At this point, bird rose into the jade-waisted slaves, the few of them reached out to grab its claws, count the casualties and report to me, following the Empress as it flew higher and higher. Now that Gong Jing wasn't around, he disappeared into the darkness. To command the winged cavalry as before, on the other hand, released a similar cooing sound from his throat. More than 10 people died. Then, with a push of his hands, there were more than 100 lightly injured. The fat owl in his arms. Fortunately, the owl as long as they didn't lose an arm or a leg, worried for it as people wouldn't take it seriously. Furthermore, they were only able to achieve this result with the help of insecticide. After flapping its wings for a long time, it finally used all its strength to fly into the air. Even if they weren't strong individually, for less than a minute, tens of thousands of them could still pose a great threat. It was as if a meteorite had fallen to the ground, who had been beaten into a half-beast by the Empress, woke up. She was tied up tightly by Renbachin and couldn't exert any strength. The owl said, her nails were 3 inches long, but they couldn't touch any ropes. Your Majesty, there's a great earth said that Renbachin put a lot of effort into this tortoiseshell binding. Your Majesty, no matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free. There's no need to check. Instead, some parts of her body became even tighter. Looking at the direction he was pointing, he knew that it was the roaring down at Lin Chaola, who was constantly struggling on the ground. He was still a little worried and asked, her eyes were still vertical, and there was a hidden green glow in them. A full 5 minutes. Her face was full of ferocity. Proudly as he stretched out 4 fingers. White rabbit creamy candy. The owl also raised its head and took out a piece of white rabbit creamy candy and threw it into her mouth. Renbachin's face swallowed the white rabbit creamy candy and calmed down for a few minutes before struggling violently again. Renbachin threw another piece of milk candy into her mouth. As for whether the time it took to brew a cup of tea was 4 or 5 minutes beside him, Renbachin couldn't be bothered to complain. He told the guard to give Lin Chaola a piece every few minutes before going to look for the Empress. The mathematics of the Aboriginals was taught by the physical education teacher. Recovered and seems to still be controlled by that herdsman. The physical education teacher was confused. We have to catch him and find a solution. The women from Mount Gongmu flew into the sky and found the Empress leaning against a tree. Sat down beside her, there's a great earth mouse in that direction. However, it wouldn't be easy to catch the roaring emperor popped its head out of the pit. Especially now that all his jade-waisted slaves were dead. In the air. It would be even harder to find him. Renbachin asked again. The Empress muttered to herself. A few of them looked at Renbachin curiously and felt that his body had a delicate luster in the night. Does your Majesty mean to bring it back to Earth? It was as if his body could emit light, which made them feel very amorous. He was the most eye-catching over Lin Chaola can't compare to Ting Yu's control over his heaven-grade weapon. No matter how far he was, the Empress we could see him. He looked so attractive. Just now, their eyes Renbachin really didn't think of this point. One of the wild women even pointed it out in an instant. This was probably what it meant when one was closely involved in the situation. 15 minutes less than tomorrow, Renbachin said. 30 minutes less than her. This method indeed had a high probability of success. How long they could scout in the air as long as she got rid of the herder's control. Lin Chaola would return to her original state. The lighter the weight, the less burden the big bird everyone had, came to the tree and the longer it could scout in the air. Looking at the tree, they could scout no one knew what to do. 2 hours. Is he inside the tree? The shortest was 1 hour plus 30 minutes, which was 1.5 hours. Otherwise, they were much more reliable than that owl. How far can you guys see? The tree was only slightly thicker than a person's head. Let Her Majesty and this sir know that the women of Mount Gongmu are best at eyesight. Remove the tree layer by layer. During the reign of the late emperor, the commander of the scouts was an ancestor of Mount Gongmu. The Empress said coldly. We can see as far as the colorful eagle peeled the tree layer by layer from the bark to the inside. One of the women pursed her lips, but there was no trace of justice. There are male and female springs on Mount Gongmu. Renbachin reminded. The women grow up drinking the female spring, wasn't inside the tree, so their eyesight is extremely good, underground, 10 times better than that of ordinary people. The Empress ordered. Qi Sitting said. A moment later, everyone looked at the dug-up with the situation of the villages in this area. Sure enough, they saw justice. It's indeed very useful. He was tightly entangled by the tree roots. You guys will follow the army and scout in the next few days. After no different from you will be rewarded according to your contributions. The originally tall and strong man was now almost unrecognizable. Your Majesty, if it weren't for the tattoo on his body and the missing finger, no one would be able to recognize him.
The crown snake is unique to this mountain.
Everyone could see that the tree roots weren't only entangling justice but also piercing into his body. They will robbing him of everything he had, this time, including his strength. Senior Chi summoned us to help your majesty. After this, we still have to return to the village. Tree trunk. The five of them tree had actually absorbed everything about him. The 60,000 mountains. The Empress clenched her fists. The Empress wasn't angry at their rejection. She had never hated a person or raised so much in her life. Since you guys don't want to leave, I won't force you. There were at least 7 or 8 skeletons the army tightly entangled by the tree roots. I will reward you later, the Empress said, and only 2 or 3 were from beasts. In fact, drones could be used to scout in a large army battle. It was unknown how many Aboriginals had made a lot of contributions to Hongwu and Zedongwai. This wasn't the only forest like this. The Empress didn't care too much. This was the third forest that they had seen. It was more convenient for these people to be in the mountains. The Empress, after getting them to rest, bone-chilling words the Empress told Chi Sitting about the situation over the past few days. I will catch them and cut off their flesh inch by inch. After listening, Chi Sitting cursed loudly. Previously, when I was looking for the rat of the late emperor and the other Aboriginals were also furious with many of the items left behind. The ones lying here were all Aboriginals. Furthermore, it turned out that they were being used as nutrients. These herdsmen must not be left alive. Although they had heard that the jade-wasted slaves used the Aboriginals as a breeding ground, he looked at the 2 of them and said, "They didn't expect this forest your wedding date is approaching. How many Aboriginals would be killed by these jade-wasted slaves in this forest?" He glared at Rinpochen and the Empress walked "It's your great fortune to marry Xiaoya," and pressed it on his forehead. "If you do anything to her in the future," Gongzheng immediately stopped breathing. "I will show you how I deal with people. Destroy this entire forest." After he finished speaking, he grinned and revealed his white teeth. The Empress said coldly before turning and walking in a certain direction. It was as if he was facing a ferocious beast that was going to devour him. The 2 of them walked for more than 5 kilometers before the Empress stopped and stood there in silence. "Do you think I'm crippled now?" It was obvious that she was in a terrible bastards. Rinpoche turned hostile faster than flipping a page. He found a place beside her to sit down and think about something. "I'm the Empress." After a long time, these herdsmen the Empress let out a long sigh as if a gust of wind had blown up. "How can I leave so easily?" With this sigh, the Empress didn't give in feeling in the Empress's heart was slightly alleviated. "They deserve to die." Chapter 772. The Empress said hatefully. That night, the Empress asked someone to draw a rough map. "But I just thought of something." It was indeed very rough. She just marked the positions of the herdsmen that we have seen so far have a forest like this around each of them. After that, furthermore, she drew out a jade-wasted slaves come to these forests 6 days, 8 days. This kind of forest should be related to the jade-wasted slaves. These were the positions of the herdsmen that she had discovered so far. The Empress nodded. A few days of travel was according to Bohr. There are more than 30 herdsmen for the other mountains and rivers, there are more than 30 such forests. It was more like a graffiti than has at least a few thousand jade-wasted slaves. There was no difference between this map and not having of thousands of them. After studying the map for 30 seconds, the Empress required the lives of 300,000 people. "Let's go there first." Including these forests, took a look and saw that it was a location that was 500,000 people wouldn't be able to stop them. There was another location that was about the same distance. With so many people disappearing, why didn't anyone discover this before? They would reach the location where Gongzheng and the others had gone missing in 2 days. It seemed like the Empress still valued Lin Xiaola and the captain of the winged cavalry. Chapter 781. The direction. The next step was easy. Why didn't anyone notice that hundreds of thousands of winged cavalry warriors and the 1,000 people that were recruited now had a total of 1,600 notice men heaven experts? After setting off the next day, she organized these experts and the winged cavalry along the way. With his reminder, in addition to the 300 winged cavalry warriors as the vanguard, the other 300 winged cavalry warriors would each lead the Dreamy soldiers. First of all, they could integrate the troops quickly and form a certain combat strength. Rinpoche frowned as he pondered. This also delayed the speed of their journey. How long do these herdsmen live? After all, even though these new soldiers were strong, in the villages that we have still lacking in terms of military discipline for more than 10 years, had a lot to learn. But they still haven't completely turned into jade-wasted slaves. Chi Sitting unjustly took over the position of commander of the entire army. Jade-wasted slaves takes at least 20 years. His angry curses could be heard in the troops. How long did it take for these herdsmen to cultivate the jade-wasted slaves flying out of the troops with a strike of his staff and then roll back obediently? 500,000 people may seem like a lot. Within 2 days, but if it is stretched to 100 years or even longer, the number of people going missing every year will decrease significantly. Kismet heaven experts were considered the backbone of the people going missing every year isn't a small number. The strongest experts in most of the strongholds were only Kismet heaven experts. Consumables and food. Now that they had joined the winged cavalry with all kinds of ideas, the numbers mentioned above are calculated based on the current number of jade-wasted slaves. However, it was too late to leave now. Taking into account the consumption of hundreds of years, when Chi-Sitting was in charge of the protectorate of the number will be greatly increased. He had seen many storms and waves. It could be up to 1 million. How could he not be able to suppress these mountain people? At this point, the Empress's face turned extremely and whispered in her ear. Brother-in-law still likes to suddenly made her feel that the Aboriginals were livestock raised different these 2 days, just like the 4 corn cattle and jumping goats that were raised outside the mountain. The first time he met Chi-Sitting, thirdly, he felt that Chi-Sitting had a fierce temperament. How many herdsmen are there? However, there are more than 30 of them in this group. Very well. According to As a result, they will give up their childhood memories when they reach adulthood. In other words, they actually have a place to live. For the past 2 days, there must be some herdsmen living there to take care of the young. The others will leave when they reach adulthood and find a place to live alone. It was enough to make people fearful. Where is that gathering place? When he spoke, his killing intent soared. What is the total number of herdsmen? Renbochin recalled all the officials in the imperial court and realized that none of them were as powerful as the Empress gloomy, and she remained silent. Not even Hong Wu. There were too many things felt that whenever Renbochin spoke, he would always exhale on her ears. Just the 30 herdsmen here alone had caused millions of Aboriginals to die in their hands. She leaned back and pushed him away before asking, brother-in-law. Renbochin thought for a while and said, I have to call him brother-in-law over there. The death toll over the years would be 10 times but didn't see Chi-Sitting. More than 10 million people is already close to the total population of the Aboriginals. If you continue to walk sideways, after all, I will break your legs. The total population of the Aboriginals was only slightly more than 10 million. But I'm riding a giant evil spider. Anything else. The giant evil spider was 7 to 8 meters long and 2 meters tall. It fed on small animals and birds. Seeing that he didn't speak, she turned her head horizontally like a crab. Her eyes were shining brightly in the darkness. Then, a scream was heard. I have an idea. The 5-day journey took them a herdsmen targeted must have been at the edge of the strongholds. After being trained by Chi-Sitting along the way, the men behind them seemed to be a little more well-behaved. But with such a large number, it was impossible to hide it for so long. If it were in the only possibility would I have let them live until stronghold was also under their control. They deserve a beating. A portion of the people in the strongholds were moved with the bruises and injuries of 8 of the 10 men behind him, were particularly the people in the other strongholds were left behind as a barrier. If a small tree isn't trimmed, it won't grow straight. Even if their behavior was slightly inappropriate, the other strongholds would not think too much about it even if they were suspicious. Chi-Sitting smacked his lips and pondered over Renbochin's words was much harder to detect. Before laughing and saying, every once in a while, this barrier would slowly move inward. Although you are as soft as an egg, your words are quite to my liking. Renbochin drew a circle on the ground and then another circle on the edge of the garden. Twitched. By moving inward bit by bit, they are nibbling away at the Aboriginals. As they approached the first destination, on end, a cat-like cry came from the front of the group. And all her hair stood on end. Not long after, however, the most dangerous thing about these herdsmen is that they have always been secretive and unknown. Is there any change in the situation? It will be much easier to deal with them. Your Majesty, those demonic butterflies are still there, let alone the Aboriginals. There shouldn't be any changes. They might have been discovered by experts before. The winged cavalry replied with cupped fists. Renbochin comforted her. Where are they? Then, they are about 3 kilometers away from here. However, I'm afraid that those experts have failed at every night and leave at the Yin hour. Just thinking about it, down the order to rest of the Aboriginals, they would probably go and take a look at the Empress if they were asked for their names. Renbochin, after a long time, and the 2 cardinal heaven experts, sigh of relief, looked at Renbochin, followed behind. You are quite smart. Not long after passing through the forest, they came across another strangely shaped forest. Renbochin gave her a thumbs up and revealed and brandishing their claws like monsters. However, his white teeth weren't so conspicuous. The energy in this area was very strong, and this forest was especially so. The Empress stood up and said, let's go back. It was even mixed with a deathly aura. I can't run anymore. For some reason, please carry me. Renbochin felt that these trees were like the struggles of a person on the verge of death. Renbochin was held by the neck by the Empress and carried back. The forest where he saw the jade-wasted slaves last time was similar to this. The Empress called Chi-Sitting his attention was attracted by the jade-wasted slaves, and he didn't pay much attention to the forest. Drastically after hearing this. I'm afraid there's something strange about this forest. It's just a guess, but the possibility is very high. The Empress and the rest took a look and looked at an abandoned village before. It's just that these trees look a little strange. Sitting's face was gloomy as he swung his cane at the tree next to him, sending the upper half of the tree flying. After breaking 7 or 8 trees in a row, doesn't it look like a human face? Vented his anger and slowly calmed down. Pointed at a tree trunk. Yes, it's indeed possible. I thought that your words were to my liking. Said. Why are you so girly today? What are you going to do? You know the 60,000 mountains better than I do. The Empress glared at him coldly. Find some people to check if there are any problems. She would let him know what it meant to cause trouble with a loose tongue. The forest where we met Boar was like this. If there are any problems, it's still the same report them immediately and kill them once they are confirmed. Although the other forests are half dead, it's still considered normal. If we check all the villages on the periphery, I think there are 2 possibilities for this. In a year. The first possibility is that this place is different from other places, to transmit information, which is why the herdsman chose this place. And the deeper one the other possibility is that this place became like this because no matter how long it takes, these foreign races must die. After thinking for a while, the Empress said coldly, "It does look strange. What about your marriage? But we didn't encounter anything the last time." Asked with a frown. I think the first possibility that you mentioned is still possible. The Empress said faintly, "It's more important. Let's not care about this anymore. Thank you for your concern, brother-in-law. We will lie in ambush nearby." When those demonic butterflies appear at night, in any case, we will kill them all. It seemed that his marriage with the Empress would have to be delayed for some time. I will let the herdsmen torture me and let them know what the aboriginals are like. You don't have to stay here all the time. Grinned and looked murderous. There are still many cardinal heaven experts in the depths of the 60,000 mountains, and I have seen more than 30 of them. Why are you so girly? As long as we gather these people together, we can easily kill these foreign races. Raised his eyebrows and looked only fierce. Have the 60,000 mountains. The Empress looked at him coldly again and raised her eyebrows. Countless ancestors fought for the outside world of them looked as different as heaven and earth. There are also the expression of the vertical eyebrows was extremely and the Chin Nation eyeing us covetously. Renbachin ignored him and said, Nation has the last time we met Boar, those jade-waisted slaves appeared at night. What? The jade-waisted slaves here also appeared at night. The Yun Nation has died, those people from the stockade also appeared at night. The Emperor of the Yun Nation is a guest in Long City. The Empress seemed to understand and asked, "In the future, you can call it the Yun Province. I think that they might be affected after daybreak." Renbachin laughed. We can follow them when they fly back. When did this happen? It will be daybreak. Why didn't I know about it? We might save some energy then. We will do as you say. The Empress immediately said. It had only been a few years. And such a big thing had happened outside. There would be a lot of casualties in eliminating thousands of jade-wasted slaves. Isn't far from falling. If it was really as Renbachin said, Great Xia had also been in trouble recently. A girl will always be a girl. Xia Bailong was killed by the stench, could finish his sentence, and the royal family the Empress turned around and kicked him in the chest 3 months later. After that, the security was naturally very to make tight. A move and was immediately sent. It took a long time for the second batch of stink bombs that Renbachin sent over to find a way to get into the palace. Then, it exploded 2 months ago. This time, someone died again. It was the Empress Dowager. Ever since Xia Baichung's death, her condition hadn't been very good. It had only been half a year since she returned to the palace, and the second batch of stink bombs exploded. Her body was already in poor condition, and she smelled this familiar formula and smell. She fainted on the spot and died the next day. 2 consecutive stink bombs were detonated in the palace. The first time, the previous emperor died, and the second time, the Empress Dowager died. This caused Great Xia, which boasted that it was the most powerful country in the world, to be slapped in the face and pushed into the cesspool. Everyone felt as if they could smell the stench that lingered in their bones. The Emperor of Great Xia issued 7 orders to the border guards in a row, urging them to speed up the attack. The royal family and the court wanted to see the news of victory in half a month. Half a month later, the Empress received the news. Hong Wu and Zi Donglai sent 20,000 reinforcements, defeating the 400,000-strong Great Xia army in one fell swoop. They also seized Yesua Pass and 3 other border guards. After seizing the 3 border guards, Hong Wu sent troops into Great Xia's territory to plunder more than 30 cities before returning with a full load. At present, Dayo had no intention of conquering Great Xia. Conquering the Yun Nation was their top priority. After seizing these 3 border guards, Great Xia's doors were wide open. A few days after the Empress received the news, the entire Great Xia court was in mourning.
Then, taxes were raised and soldiers were conscripted again. However, at this time, there was news that made things worse. Chapter 782. In an official yamen in Qingzhou. At this moment, it was occupied by a group of elite soldiers in green cotton armor. The heads of the officials who were originally in the yamen were hung in a row outside the yamen. The dark red ice on the ground was slowly melting under the sun. Su Qing, who was wearing a thin shirt, walked out of the room. The cold wind outside immediately woke him up. After breakfast, Su Qing casually asked the guard, "Is Qing Lian still in the room?" "Yes. She hasn't come out for the past 2 days." Su Qing frowned. Dingzhou, Qingzhou, and Pingzhou had all revolted according to the plan. Although Great Xia was at its weakest, its hundreds of years of rule was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. Although he had planned for many years, most of the revolutionary soldiers were just ordinary people who couldn't survive. There were less than 10,000 elites. At this time, he had to be careful and handle many things. However, after Qing Lian returned from Dayou, she didn't share the burden. Instead, she plunged into the room and did this for a month. Every day, she would hold those books that people couldn't understand and write and draw. Su Qing felt that Qing Lian seemed to have changed into a different person after going out. Or did something happen to her over there? Su Qing stood in place and pondered for a while before deciding to talk to her. After all, Qing Lian was a great help in terms of wisdom and tactics. Furthermore, her lifespan was shorter than that of ordinary practitioners. Furthermore, she was a woman and wouldn't pose too much of a threat to him. Su Qing came to the door of Qing Lian's room and knocked. There was no response. However, he heard the sound of something colliding inside. Qing Lian. Su Qing raised his voice and shouted, "Come in." A melodious female voice came from the room. Su Qing pushed the door open and saw Qing Lian sitting in front of the table with disheveled hair and a dirty face. She threw a needle on the table and wrote something on a piece of paper. Then, she picked up the needle and threw it again. Su Qing felt that she was simply crazy. He had never seen her in such a disheveled state before, but now she was sitting here with disheveled hair and a dirty face. Her eyes were bloodshot when she occasionally turned her head. He reckoned that she hadn't rested since yesterday. "What are you doing?" Su Qing walked forward and found a piece of paper on Qing Lian's table. There were horizontal lines drawn on it. Qing Lian was holding a needle and repeatedly throwing it on the paper. "I'm verifying a question. The distance between these threads is 2 inches, and this needle is 1.5 inches long. If I throw this needle down, what are the chances of it hitting one of the threads?" Qing Lian's hands did not stop moving as she spoke. Not long after, she exclaimed in admiration. "I've tried more than 3,000 times, and it's just as the book says. It's really amazing." Su Qing said solemnly, "I have something to discuss with you." "Wait. I'll finish the rest first," Qing Lian said without raising her head. After a long while, Qing Lian finally put down her pen and stretched her body. She leaned against the back of the chair and said lazily, "What's the matter? What are you doing every day now?" Su Qing stood a little further away and asked. "You wouldn't understand even if I told you." Qing Lian said lazily and yawned. Su Qing's frown deepened. In fact, he had mentioned it once before, but Qing Lian had said the same thing, which made him quite dissatisfied. "Now that big things are starting to happen, you have been looking at these things every day since you came back from Dayou. You don't care about anything else. Qing Lian, don't forget our agreement." Su Qing pointed at the things on the table with an ugly expression. Qing Lian looked up at him and said, "Oh, you think what I'm doing now is useless, right?" "That's right. Su Qing said while suppressing his anger. Qing Lian stood up from the chair, walked to the window, and waved her hand. A cold light flashed, and a sword appeared in her hand. She turned to look at Su Qing and said, "I know you have a trick called Rain Gate. Use it on me and see if I can block it. My back is facing you. Are you crazy?" Su Qing asked with a livid face. "Why don't you try and see if I'm crazy? Don't you want to know what I'm doing every day?" Qing Lian's eyes curved like a crescent moon, and her face was full of smiles. Seeing the smile on Qing Lian's face, Su Qing became even angrier. "You are a sword slave, and your cultivation comes from the sword in your hand. You don't have any abilities, so what right do you have to look down on me?" "Wait!" Qing Lian suddenly shouted, "Let's go out and try. It would be a pity if you break anything." Su Qing was even angrier, but he endured it and said, "Fine." He made up his mind. Although he wasn't as strong as Qing Lian, if she wanted to block this move with her back facing him, he would definitely teach her a lesson. The two of them left the house, and Qing Lian stood in the middle of the courtyard, holding the sword with her back facing Su Qing, and said, "Make your move. Be careful." Su Qing warned. Rain Gate was one of the 3 killer moves of Su Qing's sect. As the name suggested, it was like opening the heavenly gate of rain. Su Qing didn't carry any weapons, but his hands suddenly emitted thousands of silver lights, which fell on Qing Lian like a downpour. Even an ant would have no place to hide under such heavy rain, let alone a human. However, Qing Lian held the sword in her right hand and drew a line in the air, and the sound of pearls and jade falling on a plate rang out. Su Qing looked at Qing Lian, who didn't move at all, and his face turned pale with shock in his eyes. "Impossible, how did you do it?" Rain Gate was one of the 3 killer moves of his sect. Over the years, countless experts had been targeted by this move, so how could Qing Lian block all of it with her back facing him? Qing Lian put away her sword. Her chest rose and fell slightly, and there was some sweat on her head, but she looked very proud. "I calculated it. This method of algebra is really amazing. Your rain gate looks like it's going straight down, but there's actually a sequence and a certain pattern in it. As long as I can calculate the probability of your attack, I'll be able to block this move." Su Qing was dumbfounded. Of course, it's easy to say, but it's actually very troublesome to calculate. I have to calculate the angle of each move and the landing point of each move. I have a deep understanding of you, and I've tried to calculate this move of yours before, so I was able to calculate it. If someone else had used this move, I wouldn't have been able to calculate it in such a short time. Qing Lian softened her voice, or rather, she was comforting Su Qing. Otherwise, that old fellow and his sect would definitely think of a way to kill him. Su Qing's face alternated between green and white. He was indeed frightened. It was simply too terrifying. She actually blocked all of his moves with her back facing him. As for what Qing Lian said after that, he was skeptical. After a long while, Su Qing let out a long sigh. Even so, the most important thing now is the uprising. My ancestors have been planning for many years, and you and I have been preparing for this for many years, not to mention those who have bet their lives on this matter. Don't you know what's more important? Qing Lian's eyes turned, and she immediately beamed with joy. This matter is easy to handle. Send all the information to my room, and I'll give you an answer in 3 days. 3 days later, Su Qing received a whole stack of papers that were filled with data. From the time of the imperial court's recruitment, the number of people, the calculation of rations, the reaction time of the imperial court, the generals sent out, and the responses of the various regions, everything was marked with percentages. Even which route, how many troops to attack, how long it would take, and the probability of success were all marked with percentages. After Su Qing finished reading the stack of papers, his mind was filled with 3 words. How is this possible? How did she manage to do it? How real are these things? At this moment, Qing Lian was in a deep sleep in her room, and there was a hint of exhaustion on her face. She was still tightly holding a book called Probability Theory and Mathematical Statistics in her hand. Chapter 783. Renbachun carried Lin Chaola, cautiously found a deserted place, and returned to Earth. Before he disappeared, he saw a touch of red appear in his line of sight. Renbachun finally left with a cheerful smile. He had finally escaped from that guy again. He didn't know why traveling between the 2 worlds had attracted the Beachies so much. It had been circling around him for so long. Moreover, it appeared every time. This made Renbachun wonder if it could predict the future. Or perhaps it was some kind of beast intuition. One had to know that he could only travel within 2 to 7 days. It didn't take more than a second. It was really surprising that it would appear every time. Fortunately, it was greatly affected after entering the 60,000 mountains. Renbachun had about a 50% chance of getting rid of it and a 50% chance of it catching up. After returning to Earth with a happy smile, Renbachun threw Lin Chaola to the ground and carefully stared at her pupils. He saw that the touch of green in her pupils was shrinking and collapsing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was as if there was a black hole in her pupils that sucked in the touch of green. Lin Chaola's eyes were momentarily confused as they drifted around without any focus. Then, her eyes gradually focused on Renbachun. She wanted to sit up but found that she was tightly tied up. Especially when the rope passed between her legs, the friction made her whole body itch. Pink goosebumps rose all over her body, and her tail swept the ground like a broom. Who tied me up? Why did they tie me up? Lin Chaola widened her eyes and looked puzzled. You're awake. Renbachun sat on the bed, looked at her, and asked casually. It seemed like a dream. Lin Chaola was a little puzzled. What did you dream about? Renbachun asked with interest. Lin Chaola recalled for a long time and said, I dreamed of a lot of food, sure enough. Renbachun was speechless as he rubbed his chin. Originally, he still had some stubble, but now that he had achieved some small success in practicing the martial arts, there wasn't a single strand of hair on his body. Furthermore, he was very slippery. Who helped me? Why did you tie me up? Lin Chaola asked with her eyes wide open. It's good that you're awake. Renbachun got up and found a blade to cut the rope. Lin Chaola immediately broke free from the remaining rope and sat up. The short gray tail was still rubbing against the ground. As she moved, the piece of cloth that Renbachun used to cushion her fell off. How did it get bigger? Lin Chaola rubbed her chest, looking very confused. Why is there a tail? There seems to be a tail in the dream too. Renbachun saw that she was at a loss and knew that she wouldn't know anything more. Furthermore, she looked dirty, so he simply said, take a shower first. Lin Chaola took off her clothes as she walked into the bathroom. She was naked before she even entered the bathroom. Originally, she looked like she was 17 or 18 years old, but now, she was all curves and curves. Her entire body was exquisite, and anyone who glanced at her would start to burn with anger. He lay on the bed and listened to the sound of running water coming from the bathroom. Not long after, Lin Chaola came out of the bathroom. She had a special technique for dehydration. His body spun on the ground like a spinning top. He couldn't see anything at all. The water splashed all over the room. Renbachun's head and face were splashed, and the only impression he had was a pink trail in the air. It couldn't be helped. The human eye would always see objects that protruded from a flat surface first. especially when the object was still shaking. Put it on. Ren Bachyan threw a t-shirt and his sportswear to Lin Chaola, took out his phone, and went downstairs. Just now, he had heard sounds from upstairs. Those guys were drinking again. When he went downstairs, Ren Wanyan and the 6 winged cavalry warriors were drinking. In the blink of an eye, a few years had passed. It was now late autumn on Earth in 2025, and Ren Wanyan had been friends with these winged cavalry warriors for a few years. In particular, Ren Wanyan and Ding Jie frequently brought the winged cavalry warriors to Wuji City, which was under construction. After a few years, Ren Wanyan and Ding Jie looked much more valiant, and the winged cavalry warriors had also changed a lot. Brother. Lady boss. Everyone stood up when they saw Ren Bachyan coming down. Ren Bachyan sized up Ren Wanyan. After not seeing him for half a year, he had grown a mustache and looked a little older than him. Brother, why are you bald? What's on your body? Ren Wanyan was puzzled. He had just returned from staying in Wuji City for half a year, and he had just discovered that his brother was not only bald, but also shiny. His body shone with a metallic luster. Ren Bachyan felt a toothache when he heard this. This was touching a sore spot. Take a seat. How's the situation over there? Ren Bachyan asked. Although he would hear about the situation over there every time he came back, it wasn't as good as hearing it from Ren Wanyan, who had just returned. Look at the real thing. Ren Wanyan took out 2 boxes, one big and one small, and asked someone to fill the bigger box with water. He then connected the 2 boxes together and pressed them a few times. The bigger box began to emit white mist. Then, using the mist as a screen, images began to appear in the air. Turn off the lights. Ren Wanyan called out. He then smiled at Ren Bachyan and said, this fog projector is the latest model. It's much more stable than the previous one, but it still looks better in the dark. Ren Bachyan had seen this kind of equipment before, but he didn't pay much attention to it. At this moment, he was focused on looking at the images that appeared in the mist and listening to Ren Wanyan's explanation. At this time, the construction of the 50 square kilometers in the center of Wuji City was almost complete. All that was left was some supporting greening and living facilities. It was estimated that this part would be completed in half a year. The rest would have to be continued after that. Furthermore, the first batch of citizens had already started to move in. This group of citizens were the batches of soldiers who had been selected to practice martial arts, the martial arts experts who had been recruited, and their families. After 6 years of selection and training, there were a total of about 50,000 people. Among them, there were about 5,000 manual experts. In terms of numbers alone, this was an extremely high proportion. However, these 50,000 people were carefully selected. Every one of them was talented and above average. Most of them used to be special forces or elite soldiers. After looking at the situation in various parts of the city, Ren Wanyan turned the image to one of the buildings and said, "This is our building. It covers an area of 160,000 square meters. The bottom 5 floors are shopping malls, the 6th to 8th floors are martial arts centers, the 9th and 10th floors are entertainment centers, the 11th to 14th floors are restaurants, bars, and accommodation areas, and the 15th to 17th floors are private areas. Your villa is on the 18th floor, which is a sky garden. However, this building doesn't have a name yet. Let's call it Chiran Restaurant." Ren Bachyan said casually. "Whatever you say." Ren Wanyan wrote down the name and smiled. "Hey, I'm hungry." A lady appeared in the living room and said in a sweet voice. Ren Wanyan turned his head abruptly, and his heart skipped a beat. He saw an extremely delicate lady exuding a seductive and wild aura from head to toe. There was also a hint of innocence between her eyebrows. This lady was talking to Ren Bachyan. "She's simply a demoness." Ren Wanyan suddenly had this thought. This lady might not be the most beautiful in the world, but she exuded a seductive and wild aura. Coupled with the innocence and tenderness between her eyebrows, it was impossible to find a second person in the world who gave off these two feelings at the same time. This woman was truly capable of seducing one's soul. She wasn't much worse than his sister-in-law. More importantly, she was wearing Renbachian's t-shirt and sportswear, revealing her long legs. This made it hard for people not to fantasize. The 6-winged cavalry warriors looked at the lady and then at Renbachian. Their expressions changed drastically and they asked, "Who are you?" "None of your business." Lin Chaola, who wasn't familiar with these winged cavalry warriors, replied sweetly. Ren Wanyan's heart skipped a beat. Oh no! How dare you snatch the lady boss from the boss? Kill! The few of them were furious and started to attack. Chapter 784. It's a misunderstanding. Don't hurt them. Renbachian didn't move at all and only shouted softly. The winged cavalry warriors jumped up quickly and were pressed down quickly. The others didn't see anything clearly. They only heard a few banging sounds as Lin Chaola pressed the faces of the winged cavalry warriors to the ground. Lin Chaola simply pressed their heads to the ground and let go with a relaxed look on her face. This is Librarian Lin. All of you have seen her before. Renbachian said. The winged cavalry warriors stood up from the ground while covering their noses. They looked at Lin Chaola in shock and asked, how did she grow so big in just a few years? Lin Chaola had no impression of these winged cavalry warriors because she only knew how to eat and sleep. However, most of them knew her. Get the cook to prepare some food for her. Make more, I'm a little hungry too, Renbachian instructed the winged cavalry warriors. Nowadays, these winged cavalry warriors were pretty good at playing with their phones. Although they didn't know how to type, they knew how to play games on their phones. Sit still for a while. Renbachian pointed to the sofa beside him. Lin Chaola sat there quietly and didn't look as fierce as before. In less than 3 minutes, Renbachian saw her eyelids begin to droop. She curled up on the sofa and fell asleep immediately. Ren Wanyan glanced at the tail that was sticking out from under Lin Chaola's clothes and couldn't take his eyes off it. Was this woman playing some unspeakable game with his brother upstairs? Why did this tail feel like some kind of stopper? Continue. Renbachian gestured to Ren Wanyan to wake him up from his daydreaming. Ren Wanyan then continued to explain to him. Renbachian had previously obtained 5 square kilometers of land in Wuji City. Except for 3% of the land, which was used to build this building, the rest of the land was used to build a commercial pedestrian street, a large martial arts arena that could accommodate 30,000 people, a small hospital, 8 commercial buildings, and a large residential area. The residential area covered an area of 1 million square meters and had a total of 36-story buildings. Each building had 2 stairs and 4 households, which could accommodate a total of 720 households. The buildings only occupied 17% of the residential area. There was a small martial arts arena in front of each building. There were also 4 large martial arts arenas and a square in the residential area. Renbachian was preparing to use this place as a military camp. These buildings covered an area of 2 million square meters. What was left was a park that covered an area of 2 million square meters. Well done, Renbachian praised after reading all the information. Brother, you don't know how much Ding Jia and I have been on tenterhooks these days. We were afraid that something might go wrong, Ren Wanyan said as he leaned back. At that time, he had just graduated from university, and Ding Jia was still a university student. It was terrifying that the two of them had to be responsible for such an important matter. Thanks to Lin Feng. If it wasn't for her, the two of us would have been caught unprepared. Ren Wanyan shook his head. When he thought about the fear and helplessness he felt when he first took over this matter, his heart still palpitated slightly. There are also many people who have helped a lot, from the designers to the supervisors to the material procurement. Ren Bachyan laughed heartily. Don't make it sound so scary. In fact, most of the work is done by professionals. The two of you are only responsible for some liaison work and making decisions when I'm not around. That being said, the supervision of such a large area of construction and the flow of tens of billions of dollars was very stressful for these two young people. Even though the two of them had a group of professionals under them and even with the help of the country, other people would have collapsed long ago. Ren Wanyan then placed 5 pieces of paper on the table. Ren Bachyan glanced at them and saw that they were the resumes of 5 people. If he remembered correctly, these 5 people were currently recruited in the past few years. Currently, they were in charge of a company in Wuji City under Ren Bachyan. Why? Is there a problem? These 4 people are corrupt. The least corrupt one among them is 2 million yuan. The most daring one is this one who accepted 17 million yuan. As for this one, I'm afraid he's a spy. Ren Wanyan's expression wasn't good. After all, these 5 people were recruited by the two of them and were in charge of the company these days. There were a total of 7 people in charge, and 5 of them were problematic. This wasn't just because they were daring, but also because the two of them weren't able to suppress them. That was why they were so daring. Oh, they are quite daring. Ren Bachyan laughed. He didn't take this kind of thing to heart. We are law-abiding citizens. This kind of thing can be reported to the police. Let the police handle these 4 people. I don't think anyone will dare to be careless about this matter. As for this, leave it to the Messier 87 department. They are professionals. Is there any noteworthy news recently? There's one more thing. The country has set up a department called the Sports Education Department. There is already clear news that the 15th set of health qigong will be promoted in primary and secondary schools throughout the country and in society early next year. Ren Bachyan's relaxed expression froze for a moment before he leisurely said, "It's finally going to start." The name of the department was very low. However, the significance was extremely great. The great era was finally coming. No one knew what kind of storm it would stir up. If it was fast, it would take a year. If it was slow, it would take 3 to 5 years. This world was bound to change. It seemed that the country had already made preparations. After that, Ren Bachyan learned about the situation of the martial arts centers. Currently, there were 3 centers with a total of more than 4,000 students. Among them, there were more than 200 elite students who had reached the man-will level. Among them, the strongest one had already reached the intermediate man-will level. His talent was quite outstanding and wasn't inferior to the experts nurtured by the country. These people were the seeds of the future. Ah! 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 Early the next morning, everyone in the villa heard a woman scream from the 2nd floor. Ren Bachyan went to the room full of snacks with a toothbrush in his mouth. Lin Chaola entered this room yesterday and didn't come out the entire night. However, she wasn't as excited as she was last night. Instead, she placed her hands on her chest and looked sluggish. It's gone, gone, gone. Lin Chaola panicked when she saw Ren Bachyan coming over. Ren Bachyan focused his gaze and saw that Lin Chaola's seductive face had returned to its original delicate and pretty appearance. The pair of C's had also shrunk to a pair of A. She had become shorter. She had returned to her original appearance. Ren Bachyan touched his chin. She had actually recovered. He didn't know if it had something to do with the jade-waisted slaves that she ate or the herdsmen. However, no matter what, she was considered to have completely broken away from the influence of the herdsmen. This should be a good thing, right? What should I do? Look, it's gone. Lin Chao panicked. It looks like it has shrunk. There will be a chance for it to grow back in the future, Renbochin comforted her. Lin Chao's delicate face twitched when she heard this, and it looked like she was about to cry. Chapter 785. When they saw Lin Chao again, the winged cavalry warriors were obviously much more friendly. So it's Librarian Lin. Although Renbochin had mentioned her before, everyone still felt that she looked more familiar when they saw her pair of A's. After all, the sight of her dozing off and drooling while tied to the mount had long been deeply engraved in their hearts. The only doubt was why she had shrunk back overnight. Both her figure and appearance. Since Lin Chao was in so much pain because she had shrunk her pair of A's, Renbochin treated her to a big meal. They booked a dessert shop. In fact, there was no need to turn her grief into food. After seeing the desserts, Lin Chao hesitated for 3 seconds and put aside her pair of A's. After finishing the dessert shop, Lin Chao got into the car and looked like she was about to cry again. What should I do? There's nothing left. Renbochin looked at her and asked, do you want to eat another dessert shop? After he finished speaking, Lin Chao immediately looked away and said, I just feel sorry for you. Let me tell you, I used this trick when I was 5 years old. Renbochin grinned. When he was 4 or 5 years old, his father forgot him in kindergarten. All the other children had been picked up, and he was the only one left crying. It was a military kindergarten, and the soldiers in the kitchen gave him a nangua pear when they saw how badly he was crying. After eating it, he felt that it was delicious and wanted more. The child didn't know what else to do and continued to cry. He cried until his father came to pick him up with a claw mark on his forehead, but he didn't get another one. This incident had always been a deep regret for him. When he saw Lin Chao, he was reminded of himself in the past. This trick was exactly the same as what he used in the past. After staying on Earth for 2 days, he prepared a large number of white rabbit creamy candies for Lin Chao and instructed the winged cavalry warriors to keep an eye on her before returning to Dao. Lin Chao had already been tricked once. If she met that herdsman again, it would be troublesome. After that herdsman ran away, he might meet up with other herdsmen, so he might as well leave her on Earth. Of course, asking the winged cavalry to keep an eye on her was just a casual instruction. In fact, with a place to sleep and white rabbit creamy candies to eat, Renbochin estimated that Lin Chao might still be there in 100 years as long as there wasn't the end of the world. When Renbochin returned to Dao, the forest had already been cleaned up. All the trees were piled together and burned to ashes along with the corpses that were dug out. Seeing that Renbochin had returned, the Empress looked behind him and didn't see Lin Chao. What about her? I'm staying on Earth. Renbochin explained the reason to the Empress. She changed back to her original form. Looks like her evolution had a time limit. I think it might have something to do with the jade-waisted slaves she ate. At the mention of the jade-waisted slaves, the Empress's face turned ugly. Every jade-waisted slave was a human life. What was the difference between eating them and eating humans? Furthermore, they were her people. However, she would not blame Lin Chao for this. The fire had burned down half of the place. Some people were left behind to guard the place while the others moved on to the next target. 3 days later, the Empress issued an order for Shiwanya, the Protector General of the South, to immediately set off for the 60,000 mountains to coordinate the investigation of the situation in the stronghold. She also transferred more than 10 people from the Ministry of Revenue and prepared to use 2 years to record the situation of the strongholds in the 60,000 mountains. After this was done, she would establish a household registration management system. In the future, all the establishment and relocation of the strongholds would have to be recorded to prevent a situation like this from happening again. Millions of people had disappeared without anyone knowing. Another plan was to establish 2 new protectorates. One would be the Yun Protectorate and the other would be the Protectorate of the South. The first was naturally to rule the Yun nation, and the second was to be in charge of the 60,000 mountains. In the past, she had always thought that the dangers in the mountains were natural disasters and beasts. After this incident, she realized that there were other enemies in the mountains. 2 days later, everyone was approaching the next target. The sound of a night cat could be heard in front of the group. The sound was long at first and then became short. After half an hour, a winged cavalry warrior came to report, "Your Majesty, the person who was scouting here previously hasn't appeared." Search. The Empress frowned. This wasn't a good sign. After searching for an entire afternoon, they found the strange forest more than 5 kilometers away. However, they couldn't find any traces of the person who was monitoring the area. This meant that this winged cavalry warrior had probably fallen into the hands of the other party. When night fell, another discovery gave everyone a bad premonition. The jade-waisted slaves didn't appear in the strange forest. "Your Majesty, I reckon that the herdsmen here have already received the news and left," Renbochin said. The Empress was silent for a long time before looking up at Qi Ziding and saying, "Brother, bring some people and wait here for another day. I'll go to another place. If the jade-waisted slaves don't appear by tomorrow, destroy this forest," the Empress added. Considering that every herdsman had such a forest and that jade-waisted slaves would appear in it every day, everyone suspected that this forest might be their food or a necessity for their survival. Although they didn't know the truth, they knew that there must be a reason for its existence and that it was extremely important to both the herdsmen and the jade-waisted slaves. Understood. Qi Ziding nodded. You should be careful. You are the Empress. Others can encounter danger, but not you. That night, the Empress and Renbochin led 600 people to the next location. A week later, when they climbed over a mountain peak, Renbochin suddenly felt that the sky ahead had cleared up. The vibrant colors, birdsong, and fragrance of flowers had returned, as if the sky had cleared up after the rain. Wait a minute. Renbochin stood on the back of the Crow General and looked down the mountain. It was gloomy everywhere, as if there was a lack of color. Looking ahead, it was a scene full of vitality. We are finally out. Renbochin laughed. I can't even feel good in that horrible place. The rest of the people also looked relieved. After staying in such a gloomy place for so long, even their hearts were shrouded in a haze. Continue forward, the Empress ordered, and everyone rode their mounts down the mountain. Bang! Bang! As soon as they reached the foot of the mountain, they suddenly felt the ground shake. A series of collisions could be heard in the forest ahead, and the trees in the distance began to fall. Be alert, someone in front immediately shouted. As the trees fell, a huge creature rushed out of the forest. It was a 7-meter-tall beast with 3 horns on its head that looked like a rhinoceros. Renbochin felt that this creature was more like a dinosaur than a rhinoceros. After rushing out of the forest for more than 200 meters, the beast turned around and roared at the forest. Following which, an even bigger creature appeared. A silverback gorilla that was more than 10 meters tall pulled out a tree from the edge of the forest that required 2 people to hug and threw it at the rhinoceros. TSK. King Kong. Renbochin gasped. He didn't expect to encounter such a battle between beasts as soon as he left the mountain. However, the battle ended very quickly. The 2 dire beasts did not fight to the death when there were people around. The rhinoceros ran away first, and the silverback gorilla did not chase after it. Instead, it roared a few times at the crowd and punched the ground a few times with its water tank-sized fists. Almost every punch created a pit in the ground. After intimidating the rhinoceros, the gorilla returned to the forest. Your Majesty, how strong are these 2 beasts? Renbochin pondered for a while and asked. Given the power of the gorilla, he reckoned that his yang boosting technique wouldn't work on it. The Empress wasn't too surprised and replied faintly, roughly equivalent to a beginner Cardinal Heaven expert. She then called a winged cavalry warrior over and asked, "Where are they?" "Your Majesty, in a valley about a day's journey away." Chapter 786. On the way to their destination, the Roaring Emperor was excited to leave that lifeless place. It dug holes along the way and roared at the sky from time to time. Its small body emitted a beast-like roar that sounded like thunder on the ground. The sound waves caused the leaves to dance in the air, and the birds and beasts in the surrounding forest to tremble. Several different roars could be heard in the distance as if they were warning them. It was obvious that they were Cardinal Heaven-level beasts who regarded the Roaring Emperor as an equal. When the team stopped to rest, Renbachian grabbed the Roaring Emperor by the nape of its neck and flicked its balls. He suddenly remembered something and asked, "Are we deep in the 60,000 mountains?" They were 1.5 months away from the Yu family village. Although they were in the mountains, everyone had mounts and traveled very quickly. They traveled more than 60 kilometers a day, which meant that they were close to 3,000 kilometers in 1.5 months. In China, the distance from the capital to Shanghai was only about 2,400 kilometers. It should be the depths. The depths of the 60,000 mountains is just a term. Generally, the area that is half a month away from the outside world is called the periphery, and the area that is half a month to 2 months away is called the middle area. The rest is classified as the depths of the 60,000 mountains. The Empress saw that Renbachian was reaching out to hold her hand after flicking the balls of the Roaring Emperor. She immediately swept his wrist with 4 fingers, causing him to spin a few times like a top. "Don't touch me with that hand." The Empress looked disgusted. He casually threw the Roaring Emperor aside. The Roaring Emperor sat on the ground, stared blankly at its balls, and then roared at the sky. Halfway through its roar, it was stomped into the ground by the Crow General. When it lifted its foot, there was only a hole left in the ground. A hole suddenly appeared in the ground a dozen meters away, and the Roaring Emperor poked its head out to roar again. The Crow General was annoyed at how noisy this guy was and stomped on it again. The Roaring Emperor poked its head out from 5 to 6 meters away. Before long, there were more than a dozen holes in the ground. Renbachian watched the 2 guys play whack-a-mole while asking the Empress, "Are there Cardinal Heaven experts and Kismet Heaven experts in the depths of the mountains?" Along the way, there were at least 4 Cardinal Heaven-level beasts that were alarmed by the Roaring Emperor. This was less than a day's journey. Even in the depths of the 60,000 mountains, there are very few Cardinal Heaven experts. However, the number of Cardinal Heaven-level beasts here is indeed higher. This place was desolate and uninhabited. Although there were more Cardinal Heaven-level beasts, it wasn't too surprising. In fact, the majority of the 60,000 mountains had not been explored. The Aboriginals only occupied a small area, and even for Cardinal Heaven experts, it was full to be. As such, no matter what they saw, it would be. The group arrived to the afternoon to the next day too. "Your Majesty, this is the place," said the winged cavalry warrior who was leading the way. "Those fellows always like to find such lifeless places," the Empress said as she stood in front of the valley and took a look. Valley to be. To. The valley. To. There were not many trees in the valley, and there were jagged rocks everywhere. In the depths of the valley, there was a pool, and around the pool was a large forest that was baring its fangs. At night, the group stood guard outside the valley, waiting for the jade-waisted slaves to appear. At night, they waited outside the valley for the jade-waisted slaves to appear. They waited until the 2 moons crossed in the sky, but there was still no sign of them. "It seems that the herdsmen have left," Renbachian said calmly as he and the Empress sat side by side on a rock. They missed, but it wasn't surprising. In fact, they had already been mentally prepared for this along the way. Although the herdsmen were solitary, they weren't fools. They wouldn't stay in the same place and let them attack them separately even though they knew that they were looking for them. Now, it was confirmed that the herdsmen had indeed received the news and left. They were most likely to gather in an undiscovered place and wait for them to leave or prepare for a counterattack. This was the worst-case scenario. If they hide, it won't be easy to find them again. The Empress looked worried. Even if the herdsmen hid, their food was still the Aboriginals. To be precise, they were feeding on the jade-wasted slaves who used the Aboriginals as their hosts. It would be great if we could launch a satellite. Ranbochan couldn't help but think. Unfortunately, the satellite was still too far away. Perhaps it would take 30 or 50 years for this to happen. After sitting for a while, the Empress ordered 2 women from Mount Gongmu to fly into the sky to investigate. However, in less than 15 minutes, the 2 multicolored eagles fled to the top of the group in a panic. Help! The 2 women from Mount Gongmu screamed in panic. The 2 multicolored eagles slid down from the sky. At this moment, everyone realized that hundreds of palm-sized pitch-black birds were surrounding them and attacking them one after another. When the multicolored eagles fell to the ground, there were still 20 to 30 black birds biting on their bodies and refusing to let go. Everyone spent some effort to repel these little things in the dark. By the time they rescued the 2 multicolored eagles, they were covered in injuries. Ranbochan picked up the bodies of the black birds that had been shot down and saw that they looked like bats and pterosaurs. They had a short beak filled with tiny, sharp teeth, a mammal-like tail, and a membrane-like wing with small claws at the front. This was another type of creature that wasn't strong but relied on numbers to win. It was very difficult to deal with them, especially at night. With such creatures in the air, it would be difficult to search for them in the sky. After staying in the same place for 3 days, they destroyed the forest in the valley and tried to find any traces left behind by the herdsmen. However, they still came up empty-handed. Chi-Sitting had also caught up with them from behind. When Ranbochan saw him, he also saw the rhinoceros-like beast that he had seen when they first arrived. It took Ranbochan some effort to identify the original owners of the meat that was carried by the winged cavalry warriors. After hearing that the herdsmen here had also disappeared, Chi-Sitting raised his eyebrows and said, "It seems like they have run away. It won't be easy to find them now. The mountains are so big that we won't be able to reach the end even if we walk for a year. It's almost impossible to find these people in the mountains. No matter what, let's go to the other 2 places first," the Empress said unwillingly. Previously, she didn't want these herdsmen to gather together. Now, she hoped that they would gather somewhere and wait for them. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.